So a bit of an introduction here about myself. Michael Wiley, I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Services at Ritchie May Technology Solutions. Traditionally, Ritchie May has been around as a CPA firm for about 35 years. And then in 2017, they realized they wanted to get into technology as well. So they brought in my boss, JT, who's one of the biggest CISOs in Denver, Colorado. And I found out that they were doing cybersecurity services. I thought it was a little bit strange that a CPA firm was doing that. Contacted them thinking maybe I could provide some services or be outsourced labor for them. I had a boutique cybersecurity firm in Los Angeles, California. And I realized that they actually knew what they were doing. They brought in a really smart guy, and I wasn't really going to be able to add a whole lot of value as an outsourced contractor, or my team wasn't going to be able to, but there may be some synergy together. So 2018, we ended up merging, and the team has grown from one person in 2017 to now we've got about 20-ish people in our tech practice. So a lot of fun. It's a stable long-term company, but it feels like a startup within that company. And so we do all kinds of stuff from incident response, forensics, pen testing. Virtual CISO is our most popular service since you get access to our full team. My passion is really around cybersecurity. Any minute I get away from once my kid goes to sleep, or if my wife's at Target or anything like that, I just want to learn more about security. I've been doing it for about 15 years. I did a bunch of certifications in the past, continue to develop my knowledge. And I think it's important for everyone in the industry to keep learning and develop their skills, as the bad guys don't sleep, so we can't either. And then I head up our Los Angeles office here for Ritchie May. So if any of you ever come out to Los Angeles, or maybe you're joining us from Los Angeles, come say hi. The Burbank office is closed at the moment due to COVID, but hopefully in a couple of months here, we'll be opening back up and doing more of these trainings in person as well. So let me get started with a legal disclaimer, because I saw a couple questions about the passwords. And before I give the passwords out to the PCAP files, which are the lab files, I do want to do a couple legal disclaimers. I'm not an attorney. I just pretend to be one. In California, at least, and I don't know where you're all joining, obviously mostly from probably Alabama, but I did see some people even from India that were joining. So in California, wiretapping, the wiretapping law is a two-party consent. So what that means is that if I wanted to listen to a conversation or record a conversation, I have to get both parties' consent. That means mine, obviously, since I'm recording, but I also have to notify or get consent to the other party on the phone call or whatever I'm recording there. And so it's a crime to actually record or eavesdrop on a conversation without that two-party consent. And so it's a little bit vague whether or not sniffing network traffic is under this law or not. And even at a federal level. In California, I don't want to bore you with all the details, but Google, obviously, you know Google, they were driving around with their cars and they were mapping out Google Street View. And in doing so, they thought, well, better than GPS, let's collect SSIDs and use things like you've probably seen Wiggle, where it maps out the different SSIDs, the wireless networks as they would drive. And that's more accurate than GPS. You can get very accurate location information by triangulating based off of SSID and signal strength of wireless networks. Well, one thing that they, I don't want to say didn't know about, but one thing they were inadvertently doing while they were collecting SSIDs and mapping them to positions on the map is that they were also sniffing network traffic for any networks that were didn't have a password. So let's say your grandma had a wireless network and forgot to have a password on that wireless network. They were actually collecting those packets. And what they did with it, I don't really know. It's been a while since I read the case law, but someone sued them. And they said, well, you are actually collecting and you're sniffing and eavesdropping, and California is a two-party consent state. And obviously we didn't consent. And so Google got sued. They ended up, the plaintiffs ended up winning and Google lost. Well, Google took it to an appellate court and it was overturned. And basically the judge said, well, it's not some, they weren't really hacking or anything like that. It was just, they were driving around and it was actually the person who didn't put a password, it's their responsibility to protect their data. So you kind of have a flip-flop. One judge said it is eavesdropping if you're sniffing network traffic. Another judge that appealed that or overturned that case said, no, it's not. So there's a little bit of back and forth or whether or not that it's legal or illegal. So I just want to bring that out there and just know the laws of where you're at. I had a student once that came to me, built out some of the courses for local universities like Moorpark College. And one student said, yeah, I learned about Wireshark from your class. I told my boss about it, and he said, go ahead and sniff network traffic. And it was a verbal conversation. And I stopped him right there and said, wait a second, you have no written proof that you have consent for that. And you're sniffing corporate owned stuff, and people are not consenting to that sniffing of the traffic or collection of their network traffic. You need to be very careful with that. You may be breaking both state and federal laws. So don't want to scare you, but I just want to let you know that you want to have authorization, written consent, and knowledge. And so one of these things for security organizations, or security departments, what I recommend is that you work with HR and legal and have an acceptable use policy that says there's no expectation of privacy. We may be monitoring and sniffing and doing all this stuff and looking at computers, network traffic and whatnot, just in case you collect some sensitive information, that you are not going to get in trouble for that. Okay, but again, check with your attorneys, your legal counsel, your HR, all that stuff. Don't make these decisions by yourself. A little bit more here. So Wireshark may also be subject to US export regulations. Places like Germany are very strict about having quote unquote hacking tools. And so you want to be careful about taking these tools on your laptop if you're leaving the country as well. Consult with an attorney as always, or your legal counsel. And then the information provided in this course is educational. Richie May Technology Solutions, myself, ISSA, the chapter, none of us are responsible for any misuse of this information. The PCAPs, as I mentioned, starting out, those of you who maybe missed it, the PCAPs do contain malware. Absolutely. We've got things like WannaCry possibly in the malware, but I'm sorry, inside the PCAPs. The thing is, though, if you just take the example.pcap file, the lab files I give you, and you put it on your computer, you even click on it, it's going to open Wireshark. It doesn't infect your computer system. But if you take the ones and the zeros outside that network traffic and you pull that into a binary on your computer and call it WannaCry.exe and put it on your desktop, then you double click on it, that will obviously infect your machine. So I will also have a big red sign on the slides when we get to that section of how you do that. And I provide the virtual machine for you in case you're a little bit concerned about that. But I use these files on my machine all the time. I don't extract things on my production machine. I don't have a problem with it, but we each have our own risk level there. So be responsible. You know, don't go around clicking things or doing things that you're not aware of, or you don't know what you're doing, because these files that I provide may have some malicious stuff in them. Okay. And then for those, after now saying that and the little disclaimer, I will put in here into Slack the password. So the lab file passwords is infected, all lowercase, and that will let you open up the lab files, the PCAPs. You may want to use 7-zip to extract the lab files. The built-in Windows extraction tool, Windows Explorer, it just doesn't work very well. So I recommend using 7-zip to extract that. Okay, and if you are using any other type of Linux or Mac, you know, you can feel free to shoot me a message here on Slack, and I'll help you during a break extract that, because sometimes Linux doesn't prompt for a password either. Okay, so a little bit more about some of wiretapping in the history books. So the NSA also had their own version of sniffing traffic, and that became public knowledge, I guess, when Edward Snowden talked about PRISM. And PRISM was the NSA's way of tapping into our network traffic and looking for malicious stuff. So if you followed or read Edward Snowden's biography or some of the interviews, you'll get a little more information about that. But even the federal government has, and I'm sure other governments as well, they're doing they're using tools like Wireshark to tap into network traffic. And in case of someone's question about the password not working on Mac, give me a second when we get to the break. I will help you with that. I believe there is an alternative to 7-zip that you can use that will prompt for a password. I just can't remember it top of my head. If anyone else knows, please post that. Otherwise, I'll dig into that on a break. And so there's a way that's also the federal government is able to tap into other areas or just collect network traffic. They have to go through FISA courts. In Edward Snowden's book, they did talk about that. And from 1978, I guess, to 2016, only 21 requests in the FISA courts, which we don't really have a lot of documentation of what goes on there. Only 21 were rejected to surveil people and collect network traffic. And out of those 21, they were just basically a little too broad. So they came back and narrowed the scope of that, and they were able to then go ahead with that. So In 2017, you could see about 1,600 different requests were approved. So there's a lot of this stuff going on the government level as well. It's not just something that you see in the private sector. Okay, and so what is a protocol analyzer? Right? I got a question about this of, well, what is Wireshark? What's a protocol analyzer? What are we doing here today? And so to give a little background on that, a protocol analyzer, it could either be hardware or software, and it captures and analyzes ones and zeros traversing the network. So when you send an email, when you visit a web page, when you do a DNS request, when you do anything on your computer that it has to go from your machine to anything else on the network, that it's collecting that and analyzing that. And so what it needs to do to be able to collect that network traffic, the analogy that I use is that imagine that you moved into a new apartment building and you open up your mail for the first day and you take a look at it and you see that there's some mail that is addressed to the prior tenant. So it's addressed to Bob Smith. And traditionally, I mean, what you're supposed to do is that you look at that, and if it's not addressed to you, it's illegal to open up that mail that's addressed to someone else. It's not meant for you. And so what you're supposed to do, or either I guess toss it or send it back to the sender, but you're not supposed to open it at all. And the same thing works on the network level also. If a network card, your network card on your laptop or computer, whatever you're on right now, if it takes a look at a packet, it receives it and it says, well, this is not addressed to my MAC address of my network card, it's supposed to go discard that and ignore that packet. But when we're doing network sniffing, we actually want to see all traffic on the network, not just the things that are addressed to our device. So in those situations, the network tool or the protocol analyzer like Wireshark, it takes the network card, it puts it into promiscuous mode. And by doing that, it will then allow the network card to receive packets or letters that are not destined to that address. And so some of the popular protocol analyzers that you could take a look at are Wireshark's the one we're going to focus on today, TCP dump, OptiView, T-Shark. There's a whole bunch of them out there. I focus on Wireshark because it's well maintained, it's open source, it's free. TCP dump is probably my second favorite, and there's a use case for each of them. But I want to keep this simple and just focus on one tool today. Okay, so some of the course objectives that we're going to talk about over the next couple of hours here. We want to learn how to collect network traffic. We want to expand our Wireshark knowledge and skills. This course is meant to be for those who have possibly a basic level of knowledge of networking and security, but you don't have to be an expert. I want to start from a ground level of knowledge and build you up quickly. So anyone who's new to this, you should be able to follow along. And if I go too fast, because this is a condensed course, I'll post in the chat there. We do have, I've got this recorded from another organization and YouTube, so you can follow along again if you miss something, or you get a client phone call or bathroom break or anything like that. But I also, for those who have used Wireshark a lot, I've had security analysts, pen testers, et cetera, take this course at DEFCON, at B-Sides Las Vegas, other places. And they say, wow, there's a lot of things I didn't realize Wireshark could do. And so wherever you are in your skill set or your path to security excellence, you should be able to take your level of knowledge today and go a little bit higher. You should be able to configure custom Wireshark profiles for different use cases after the end of this course. You'll be able to add geo-IP information to enrich the data that you collect in Wireshark. You'll be able to quickly identify indicators of compromise from the PCAPs that are in my lab, as well as maybe your home network. And then we'll be able to hunt for some malicious network traffic in the various labs that I have. The other cool thing is that I didn't exclude labs from this shorter workshop. Instead, I gave you all the labs and all the walkthroughs from the 8-hour course, so you have those to play with afterwards. We definitely won't get through all the labs today. We'll get through all the easy ones and then a few of the more intermediate advanced ones, but then you could take the rest home and over the weekend play with those as well. And of course, if you connect on LinkedIn and Twitter, I'm happy to answer questions or even do a Zoom meeting one-on-one later on if you have more questions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about incident response versus threat hunting here. Okay, so what is incident response? Well, it's basically addressing and managing post cybersecurity cases. So it could be anything as simple as, I wouldn't really call it a cybersecurity incident, but coffee spilt on a laptop. It may be that a laptop was stolen from someone's car at the gym. It may be that there is malware that someone clicked on. It may be that there's a possibility that social security numbers were breached out. Every organization is going to have a different definition of breaches and where their threshold is. But the process that we're going to take a look at is we basically want to first prepare for potential cybersecurity events or incidents, identify that incident, right? It may be, well, this email that came in, we don't know if this attachment is malicious or not. So you have to identify if it's either, if it is actually an incident or if it's a okay email. Then you want to contain the threat, maybe isolate it, then eradicate the threat that may come in, recover business operations back to normal, and then have lessons learned and figure out, well, if malware got to my endpoint, that means that all my layers of security, my firewall, my email gateway, my IDS, my IPS, all these things, antivirus, they did not work. They were ineffective. I need to now go back and make changes so that we are more effective and that the bad incidents don't get through all of our layers of security. Okay, and so, well, then what's threat hunting? Well, by definition, it's the process of proactively, iteratively searching through networks to detect and isolate advanced threats that evaded existing security solutions. So as I mentioned there, if you've got malware that infected a system, it got ransomware, that means that all your other layers of security were ineffective and the malware got past that. And so if that happens, and it frequently does, because we see the news all the time, Capital One got breached, so-and-so got ransomware, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of our security controls are being bypassed by these advanced threats. Well, when that happens, and in no case, no matter how much budget you throw at it, 100% of threats cannot be prevented. And so threat hunting assumes the organization has already been compromised. And I think this is important, especially in the time that we're in right now with COVID-19, because we have now taken a traditional castle approach to security with a big perimeter with expensive firewalls and network IDS, network IPS, et cetera. And we have now taken our perimeter and chopped it up into thousands of little pieces. So while there are 1,200 employees in your organization, well, they all used to be in one location or two locations with these network security controls and a SOC and all this other stuff that you have now taken each device within your castle, taken it outside the castle walls, and now they have their own perimeters to fight off all the bad guys. So I think we are going to see the year of breaches. That's what we're calling it here at Richie May, the year of breaches. I think in the next 3 to 18 months, we're going to see a whole lot of bad stuff come out in the news about different breaches that happened. The reason I think we're not seeing as many right now is because of dwell time. Traditionally, if we look at dwell time, which is the time when things were compromised to the time that we identified the compromise, depending if it was an external or internal notification, we're anywhere between about 50 to 150 days between the breach and the time we actually realize we're breached. So I do think that we're going to see a whole lot of stuff. And I think it's going to be important for organizations to implement some type of threat hunting program, that they take these devices that are now at home, at people's homes, and away from the perimeter and away from all these security controls, they're being introduced back into the organization. I think we need to assume that we're compromised and start hunting for this. So hopefully this helps you in your goals and business objectives and keeping the organization that you work for safe. And then also, we know that threats may evade some security controls, especially with COVID-19 and work from home. So some of this stuff will help you take a look at your network when you all go back to the office. Okay, so let's look at some scenarios and use cases. And this is a newer part of my slides. And I implemented this because I used to just jump into the packets, and then people said, wait a second, I don't even understand. You gave me these lab files, but where did they come from? How would I get my own files in my own organization? So let's step back a little bit and say, okay, how would we possibly be alerted and get these files that I gave you? Where did they come from? Well, there's a bunch of different scenarios and use cases, and it's kind of going to depend on your organization. But some of these may have come from, for example, you implement an intrusion detection system, IDS, or an intrusion prevention system, IPS, and they alerted. They said, hey, there is, for example, here, I'm going to come back to the slide, but here's an example of a snort alert. What I did is I took Snort, which is free, open source, and I then added the emerging threat, or you could see there abbreviated ET, Echo Tango, emerging rule threats, rule set. There's a free version, a paid version. You can customize your rules. I just did everything free at the moment. So I took Snort. I then sniffed my network. I added the emerging threats rule set, and I said, just look for anything that's here in these free rule sets that might be suspicious. And then I tried to click on some malware and see what happened. And so right there, we can see that one of my lines of the alerts, it says ET info, so emerging threat info rule. It's generic, it's suspicious. There's a post, so some data was sent to a website or a web server, and the web server had a dotted quad with a fake browser. So essentially, rather than going data being sent to, like let's say you log into your Gmail account, you are posting your username and password to Gmail. You don't post your password to 8.132.74.199. You post it to gmail.com. You post things to facebook.com, twitter.com. We don't use IP addresses. Most of our users are not using IP addresses to post information when they're using their web browser. And then with a fake browser, it's also saying that, well, it doesn't look like Firefox. I can hear the street sweeper coming by. I apologize for the noise. It's posting it to this IP address rather than a URL or a domain name, I should say. And it's doing it with a not legitimate or a known web browser like Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, whatever. And so that's suspicious, and it pulls it up. So in that case, I may then have Wireshark running or TCP dump or something that's collecting network traffic. And at that point in time, then what's happening is that I'm going to look at that alert and say, okay, so I see here at 0321 at 1550, there was this malicious event. I now want to take a look, a chunk of 5 or 10 minutes of my network traffic at that time period and look at what happened and analyze the packets. Because right here, it just tells me there's an IP address with a fake browser. I don't know what happened. I don't know if data was exfiltrated. I don't know if this was beaconing C2 traffic with malware. I don't really know what happened at this point. And so this is just an alert data. I need to now dive into the network traffic and figure out what exactly happened. And so now I pivot over from Snort, I go to Wireshark or whatever other network traffic tool I have to analyze the packets. And that's how we have the packets that are in your lab files. Okay, so that might be one scenario. Another scenario is that you might use an NSM tool, something like Security Onion, another open source free tool. And so if you get Security Onion, you could have, let's say, a 24-hour retention of packets that you're looking at. And so Security Onion has everything built into one, and it shows you the bro alerts or the snort alerts or Seracata or whatever alerts in your dashboard. Kibana, you're then switching over, and then you're looking at the PCAPs from that. Security Onion makes that very easy. You don't have to have all these different tools that are all over the place. You're just going to basically click on the alert, pivot over to Wireshark, and you immediately look at the packets for that period of time. Great tool. You might just be doing threat hunting. So you took my advice and said, yeah, we're a little bit concerned that our endpoints now might be infected, and we want to do threat hunting after everyone comes back to the office. So you start just looking at specific things like, well, I'm going to look at HTTP traffic. I want to look at clear text traffic. I want to look at what looks like randomly generated domain names. So you're looking at specific things and trying to identify that in your network. And that's maybe how you got these PCAPs. You might run your network traffic through Bro or Zeek because network traffic is a lot of data, right? I'll show you some examples here shortly of how much traffic you're going to be collecting. It's a lot. It's expensive to store all that. So maybe you're just looking, you say, well, I don't want to look at full packet capture, but maybe I want to run Bro or Zeek on my network. And what that will do is that you're taking a span port, or you're mirroring the north-south traffic of your network, or wherever you want to put a sensor. And it's then looking at all the traffic, and it's creating statistical logs based off of that. So it'll then pull out certain things like binaries or DNS traffic. And that way you don't have to collect all network traffic. It's generating logs based off of the network traffic it looks at. So that's a little easier way to take a look at network traffic. Maybe you're using a tool like SoftElk developed by Phil Hagen at SANS. Maybe you've got your SIM that alerts you to some malicious DNS traffic. Maybe you've got EDR like Red Canary or Carbon Black or CrowdStrike or whatever tool you're using, and it alerts you to malicious traffic, beaconing, obfuscated PowerShell, and then you dig into your network traffic that way. Maybe it's your firewall that alerts you. There's so many different scenarios where you may then get alerted and want to pinpoint that and actually look at the full network traffic based off of those alerts. Okay, so now let's take a look at Bro or Zeek. So there's two ways of using Bro or Zeek. You could either take a PCAP file, a network traffic file that I've got that's already recorded. So you could take the lab files. If you've got the Kali Linux VM, I already have Bro installed. What you can do is then take those PCAPs, run it against Bro, and it will then generate these different log files like the con log, DHCP log, DNS log, file log, HTTP log, packet filter log, PE log, SSL log, weird log. Oh, that one sounds good. And the X509 log. So whatever traffic, it takes that full network traffic. It looks at all the packets, everything in that PCAP. It then creates logs based off the data it looks at. Super cool for hunting because you don't need to look at a 10,000 line packet file or lines of packets. Instead, what you can do is you run it through Bro, and then it starts isolating things. You say, well, yeah, I am curious about HTTP logs, so I'm just going to focus on that. It also, I love the weird log because it just basically says, these are things that we find suspicious. You might want to look at that first. And so if you take a look at that, so the third piece on the screen there where it says cat files.log and then piped out to Bro cut. So basically what you could do is you can then take these logs that Bro generates and you can then look at them. You could look at the full thing, but it's a lot of data. There's tons of fields you'll be looking at. So what works a little bit better is using Bro cut, and Bro cut will then let you take specific fields. It's almost like cutting up the file and looking at specific fields you want. So for example, if we run the 2017-03-25 traffic analysis exercise PCAP, we run that into Bro. We then get all those log files. If we take a look at files.log, we cat that out. We can then look at specific fields. We can see there the very first line is a.png. So it identified a file in that network traffic called a.png. It gives us some type of unique identifier hash. It gives us the source IP, the destination IP. It says it was traveling over HTTP. And the interesting thing there is then it actually gives us what type of file it is. So the file header says it's application xdos.exe. Wait a second. Why is this file called a.png, yet it's a DOS executable? Something suspicious to look at. So this is how you can start identifying things very quickly in a large PCAP. And I think that PCAP there that I give you, the 2017-03-25 PCAP, that one is about 10,000 lines of network traffic. And so very quickly, within a matter of seconds, I can identify things that I want to narrow in and look at that range within the PCAP rather than going line by line for 10,000 lines of code or traffic. Okay, so then how do we collect packets, right? There's a couple important things I want to bring up. I used to not have this, but then I realized after I had made the mistake and then others were making the mistake also, we do need to talk about this. So there's a few different network devices you may have in your network. Hubs, which are seen a whole lot less these days, and then possibly switches, which work on layer 2. The difference though is that if you do happen to find a layer 1 hub in your environment, or even just on eBay or wherever, if you plug in multiple devices into that hub, what's going to happen is if you have a device plugged in the first port, it sends a packet out and it's destined to a server on port 8. Well, it's going to send that packet in on port 1. It then sends a copy of that packet on port 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. It sends it to everyone. And then everyone gets a copy of that packet, and the network cards will look at it and say, nope, this is destined to someone else. I'm going to ignore it. Then someone else opens it. Nope, this isn't destined to me either. I'm just going to ignore it. But then finally the server gets it and says, yes, this is destined for me. This is my address. I'm going to open it up. Super inefficient. As you can imagine, it causes a lot of network traffic, and there's some security and privacy concerns there. So everything is just pushed out to every port, and then it just assumes that every device connected won't open traffic that's not meant for it. But layer 2 switches, the difference is that they're a little bit smarter. They've got a CAM table. And what the CAM table does is that it keeps track of which MAC address is plugged into each port on that switch. And so when something in port 1 then sends a packet and it's destined to a server on port 8, it's going to send that in on port 1. The switch is then going to take a look at it and says, okay, I see that the destination address is meant for the MAC address and that's associated with port 8. I am just going to send that to port 8 and not everyone else on the network. So the downside of that for us security professionals who are trying to sniff network traffic is that if we plug into port 2 and we turn on Wireshark in promiscuous mode so we can collect all the network traffic, if there's traffic destined for port 8, the server that's on port 8, we're not going to see that. We're only going to see broadcast traffic or things that are destined to us. So the downside is that we're missing a whole lot of stuff. And in my early days of using Wireshark, I didn't realize that. So I would come into a network trying to troubleshoot something, thinking I was smart, and I would turn on Wireshark plugged into one of the ports, and I would be like, wow, there's a lot of broadcast traffic on your network, or, there's a lot of traffic just destined to me. I'm a top talker on this network. And I was just blind that I was not seeing a majority of the traffic going to the rest of the devices on the network. So lesson learned. And I just let people know, because a lot of times after this class, they would just go and say, look, I'm not getting everything. I'm missing a lot of stuff. And that's because you can't just plug into a switch and assume you're getting all the traffic on the network. You have to configure that. And I'll talk about that in a second. The other option is maybe you are just wirelessly sniffing. The advantage of that is that when we talk about wireless devices, most of those are running or they're using CSMA CA, which basically it turns it back into like a hub where you send a packet on your wireless network. It's going to everyone, but they use some tools so there's no collision, or protocol CSMA CA. And that avoids collisions like we had on old hubs. So if you do have a wireless network, whatever is in that, broadcast domain, sorry, the sweet sweeper is coming by again. And basically, so if you're on wireless, long as you're an SSID and you've got a big broadcast domain, you are collecting everything. But if there's, for example, a HR wireless and a production wireless, obviously you're just collecting what's on that wireless network and you are segmented off. If you're at a hotel, a lot of hotels or conference centers, they are using different tools to isolate, or different technology to isolate you. So even though you're on the same SSID as your friend, you may not be collecting their traffic as well. So it kind of depends on how wireless is set up, but for the most part, you'll be collecting everything there. And then routers you may see in your environment or firewall, those are going to work on a higher layer, like layer 3 or multi-layer. And those have they have the ability to collect network traffic, but that's going to be north-south traffic. So that's going to be things going to and from the internet. If you have other switches on your network that are at a lower level that are routing, you may be missing some lateral movement. So from HR to production, or finance to HR, you might be missing that type of traffic, but it really depends on how your network's set up. And those topics of how that's done, we can talk about at a later time, or you get a lot of that information if you've taken your CCNA or you pick up a CCNA book. That will really give you a better picture of how things are set up. I just wanted to kind of introduce that and just make sure we're all on the same page, that you can't just go plug into your switch and assume you're collecting everything on your network. Okay, so how else can we collect traffic? Let's say that we do have some switches and we want to be able to capture everything and pretend it's a hub, or collect things like it used to be a hub, right? We've got a switch, we don't have wireless, we want to collect traffic. Well, there's a few ways we can do that. You can either go get a hub and you can put it in strategic places on your network. May cause some network latency or some bottlenecking, so you got to be careful with that. You could be on a wireless network, but then there's some other tools that you could do, like you could take one of these network taps. At the bottom there, that's going to be the DIY version that's kind of duct taping things together. So if you have a couple network jacks and a Cat5 or Cat6 cable, you can look at instructions online and you could build one of these these network taps at home. Full disclaimer, it's hit or miss. I've tried this twice. And one time I plugged it into my voice over IP phone to collect voice traffic, and it just kept rebooting my phone. I could not intercept the traffic. The second time I did it, I plugged it into a printer and I was able to collect network traffic. So it was a little bit hit or miss on how you do that. Not the most reliable, but if you are in a pinch and you don't have access to the router or the switches or anything like that, you may be able to make one yourself. And it kind of impresses people if you walk in as the security professional and you're like, well, I need to tap into your network. Give me 2 Cat5 cables and give me some network jacks. I'll make my own tap. And everyone's all impressed with that. Or you could carry around a tool like the other two that are in black there. On the one on the left there, that one's made by Hack5. I think it's called the Packet Squirrel. I really like these because you could plug them into power, but you could also use a phone charger, or a phone battery pack. So if you do have a battery pack to charge your phone, you can plug that in and possibly get a day's worth of battery life. You can also then, you don't even need a computer. You can take a small USB key, plug it in there, and just drop it in. So if you could imagine, like you find a wireless access point, or you find a printer, or if you're on a pen test, I'd love these for pen tests, because I just walk in with these small little packs. I can stick them under someone's desk. I don't even need a power source, and I'm collecting a day's worth of traffic, and everything goes onto a tiny little USB drive that I have. Super cool for a pen test. The downside there is that it is going to capture only enough that fits on the USB drive, but you can find the small ones with, you know, a terabyte now or 512 gigs. So you've got a decent amount, and then you got to go collect it. It's pretty cool though. And the other downside is that it is 100 megs per second. So if you are on a gig circuit or you've got a high bandwidth circuit and you plug that in, you may bottleneck the network a bit. There's a question in the chat. Does the squirrel have to be inserted between the router and a firewall, or firewall and a local switch? So it really depends, and that comes to the network diagram. And let me skip ahead real quick on my slides just to see if I can show you an example here. So right here on my slides, it depends on what you're looking at capturing. You are always going to have limitations in what you capture. It's not like you can plug this in and see everything on your entire network all at once. You have to have a use case and have either one of these, or you have to have multiple. So for example, in this picture where I've got the red arrow and I dropped a packet squirrel there, that is going to be between the router and the internet. So I'm going to see things that are possibly NATed, and I won't see local addresses, but I am going to see everything that leaves my router. If there was things that were blocked, like let's say I have egress firewall rules on that router or ACLs, I won't even see the attempts because I am outside. I am past the router on that and that perspective. Now, if I move it here and I drop it between, basically, if I have a server and I just unplug the network cable, plug one side into the packet squirrel, grab another side, plug that into the server. So I'm basically almost thinking like a man in the middle of your own device. So if you plug that between the server and the switch, or the server and the router, wherever that server is, you're just plugging it in there. You are collecting all traffic between the server and the rest of the network. But you may even put it somewhere else. Like you may want to put it between the printer. So you would drop it down lower towards the printer, but you're missing things. You wouldn't see any traffic between the computer and the internet. So you have to decide what you're interested in, what your use case is, and you're going to drop this tap in at that location. The most common location is going to be probably between your switches and your router, or your switches and your firewall, or your router and your firewall, somewhere between like the egress point between the end of your networks and the internet. And the reason for that is if I have one place to put it, I'm going to put it there. And the reason for that is that most malicious activity, I'd say 98% of it, is going to have some type of north-south traffic, ingress-egress traffic. And the reason for that is because most attackers are not coming into your physical building. And yes, if they bring in a USB device and they plug it in like a LAN turtle or something into your device, or a keylogger, you're not getting that stuff. But if the keylogger they plug in is sending the keylogging data out to an FTP server, you will see that. So from at least what I see, and yes, there's insiders that are going to print stuff and you're not going to see that, and other use cases, there's lateral movement you might be missing. But if you put that on the egress point of your network, the place that it's going out to the internet, you're going to see C2 communication, so command and control. You're going to see malware phone home for instructions. You are going to see malicious DNS lookups. You're going to see your users go to malicious URLs and servers. You are going to see data exfiltration. All that stuff has to go out the internet. And so that's why if I have only one option for collecting network traffic, it's going to be at the edge of the network, because I want to see that in and out traffic. And I want to make this, I want to come to conclusions based off of that. So ideally, yes, I'd have it all over the place and I'm sniffing all the traffic, but you've got to be a little bit strategic and figure out what you think is happening or what might be happening, and place your taps in those strategic locations. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. And then finally, at the top there of this slide, I think it's called a Shark Tap or something like that. You can find it on Amazon for about 150 bucks-ish. Those are going to be more at gig speeds. So if you have a circuit, like for example, my home network is now 1 gigabit per second symmetrical. So I have 1 gig up, 1 gig down. In that case, if I stick a packet squirrel, or the other device on the right there, which is a device that does not require any power, it is limited to 100 megabits per second. So I would throttle my network traffic significantly in that case. I'd only get 10% throughput. So in that case, I may want to go with the option at the top there, that Shark Tap, and that would give me gig speeds of tapping. Okay. And then the other option is if you do, let's say you're not a pen tester, but you're defensive and you have ability to configure your switches and routers and stuff, you can take your switches and you can put them in a port in mirror or span mode. And here's a Cisco switch, and what you would do, it's just a couple of lines. You go into config, you then monitor, you specify which where the source is. So it could be one port that you want to tap, or it could be, let's say, fast Ethernet 1 through 5. You could do a range, you could do VLANs, you could specify all of that. Go look at Cisco documentation for that. And then you say where the destination, so where all that sniff traffic's going to go, and that's going to be in port 3, and that's where your Wireshark machine is going to be at that point. So one caveat to this, at one point when I was more naive, I had a client with 10 48 port gig switches that were 20 years old. Maybe they weren't gig, maybe they were 100 meg. But anywho, they had about 1,000-ish, not 1,000, 500 ports there. And I decided to span them all to try and troubleshoot. And I put them out of one 100 megabit port, and that caused the network to crash. So I can't give you a hard rule. There's some smarter people out there, probably like Gigamon or some of these places that all they do is focus on packet capture, that could give you a rule of thumb. But you just do want to be careful if you are spanning or mirroring things on switches, especially if they're not line rate switches, that you may be overwhelming a single port and cause some network issues there as well. So maybe start small, do it after hours. Make sure that you plan this out a little bit and you're not just taking all 500 ports of your network and putting it to one 100 megabit port, and you may just crash your switch at that point. Okay. Another option too is that you may just say, okay, well, I want to look at my production network, my crown jewels, or my HR network. I'm going to take that VLAN, span it to one port 3 on my switch. And then I don't want to have a laptop with Wireshark running 24/7. So you could then put a tool like Security Onion that's going to have all this stuff built in, and it's going to collect that traffic for you. Plenty of other tools out there too, but Security Onion is just so easy and so user-friendly. If you're not familiar with it, it's essentially like Kali Linux. Kali Linux is a Linux distribution for pen testers. This is what I call the Kali Linux for blue teams. It is an amazing tool set if you're blue teamer, defender, incident responder. We recommend clients use this, but also I've got a incident response box with it preloaded. It's a small little computer case that I have. If you called me out and said, I think we have a breach, what do? We don't have logging, we don't have this, we don't have that, help. I would basically ship you this or bring this box with me, span port, set up a span port or use a wiretap, drop this Security Onion box in, and it starts just immediately collecting and generating logs and bro logs, snort alerts. It's all configured for incident response for me. And then you get a nice dashboard. As of last year, the year before, Doug Bergs, who maintains Security Onion, built out these dashboards. Now you get visual dashboards for things that have happened. So if you can see here, if anyone wants to post in the Slack, I'd love your feedback. Here we've got a Kibana dashboard, and I have something highlighted there on the right side. And so that's the connections. It's top 10 total bytes by destination port. So we see that there's a large amount of traffic going to port 4444. Can anyone in Slack let me know what 4444 might be and why I might want to look into that? Okay, I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer there. Andrew says Meterpreter. Absolutely. So if you're not familiar with Metasploit, it is a framework for pen testing. And so if you are trying to set up a reverse shell, and you'll see some of this later on in the labs, a reverse shell, basically, they may send you a file called Adobe Updater and .exe. You click on it, and what it does is then sends back a remote shell, a remote connection to the attacker, and the attacker then has full command line control of your computer. And the default port, if you don't make any changes to Meterpreter, is going to be 4444. So this tells me, just looking at this, is that 99% sure someone has a Meterpreter shell on one of my computers in my environment, and it's a lot of traffic in my environment. So I may want to look into that. Okay, I'm just going to skip over this as more CCNA stuff. We've already talked about where to capture things. And then I've been talking about the different types of data that you may see in a network. What we're going to talk about today is going to be full packet capture. That's what those PCAP files that I gave you are. They're full network packets. So every packet that goes to and from on this network, wherever I captured it, that is what you have in those PCAP files. Everything. And so we might be able to look at that within Wireshark, TCP dump tools. Protocol analyzers can look at that. There's other types of data you may be able to collect or see on your network, and there's pros and cons to all of them. Statistical data, so that might be just NetFlow or SFlow. That's session data, is going to be like source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port protocol. It's a high level statistic. So we might just see a little bit like that slide where we had port 4444 and we saw that destination traffic there. It's really just statistical type of data, I would call it. I know we have a different type of bullet point there called statistical data, but it's really just, you can see to, from, and some basic information. The problem, it's great because it's really low in hard drive space. I could collect so much session data and I could keep it forever, and it's going to cost me, only a few bucks. But the downside is that, let's say we see a large amount of UDP data going to our domain controller. Is that a brute force attack? Is that a denial of service attack? Or is that just everyone logging in the morning into one domain controller? It's all UDP traffic. I don't know. I can make some assumptions, and I can use some critical thinking to try and determine what that is, but I cannot see the actual packet, so I cannot definitively say what that is. So SFlow, NetFlow data, it's great, but we can't see all the details of that. And every time I see HTTP data, it doesn't mean it's HTTP. It could be data exfiltration. It could be other stuff just using port 80. We don't really know unless we see that actual traffic. You may also, probably most of you are familiar with syslog data, like transactional data. That may come from your DNS logs, DHCP logs, your Linux systems, et cetera. Those are more system-like logs. Alert data is probably coming from your IDS, IPS, firewalls. And then you've got statistical data, which is a little more like bandwidth, usage, stuff like that. I have a bad habit of calling session data statistical data, but they are technically different. Okay, and so some considerations with full packet capture here. And we'll get through a few more slides and take a quick break. So with full packet capture, I love it. It's my favorite. But the downside is that it is hard drive intensive. It is resource intensive. You've got to have a lot of storage space to capture all this stuff. So with Wireshark, some of the defaults we have is that it's going to save packets to a temp file, and it's really in memory. So if you don't save it to your hard disk, you're going to lose some of the traffic that you've captured. It's going to keep running. Wireshark will run forever until it crashes. And the slower the machine you have, the less RAM. It may be a few minutes and it crashes. If you've got a more powerful machine, it may be 20 minutes and then it crashes. It also depends on the amount of network traffic you have. It's going to capture everything by default. Every single packet that goes to and from their system, it's going to capture that. It's going to then try and determine what type of packet that you have or that it sees and take those ones and zeros, and it's going to classify that. So it's going to take something that has port 80 and it says, well, I think this is HTTP traffic, and I am then going to apply a color and columns and things specific to that traffic. And I'll show you a demo of that in a little bit. It's also going to have a ring buffer that can fill up pretty quickly. And so we want to not use Wireshark forever, essentially. And I'll show you some of those settings. And then Wireshark, TCP dump, et cetera, they capture full packets. It's going to capture, as I mentioned, everything that comes across. Every 1 and 0 in that packet, you are going to be able to see that and then interpret that information differently. So when thinking about capturing full packet, and this is why most people don't capture full packet captures all the time and just retain it for a long period of time. This right here is from it's only a couple day period. So I think it's 1 week here. We got June 4th to June 10th. And it's 4 people in a medical office. This was a plastic surgery company. It was an old client of ours. And we were capturing full packet capture in their environment with just 4 employees. And because they do plastic surgery, they only really are at their computers to do billing and stuff, like 1 or 2 employees. Most of them were in the actual surgery center, or they were doing exams and consults. They didn't use their network a lot. It wasn't like financial trading or downloading big files. It was very low usage. And you could see 1 week worth of network transfer was 46 gigs. So if they want one week of retention, they need a 50 gig hard drive or amount of storage. If they wanted a year's retention, you need to multiply that times 52. And that's how much storage you have to have. Okay, so now here we've got a 1 week period, and this is a 7-employee real estate office. And so that they're not doing a whole lot of stuff either, because they've got open houses. They're out in the field showing houses. So they're not there all the time. And these 7 users are using about 70 gigs per week of network traffic. Okay, so you're going to have to look at that and make those considerations of your network. Of if you use a gig worth of bandwidth per day, that means you need 1 gig, obviously per day of storage for however long you want that retention. If you want to have a year's worth of retention, you need 365 gigs. Most of us aren't using just 1 gig of traffic. We're probably each using, the hundreds of gigs per week in traffic, depending on the size of your organization. So that can get very costly and expensive to retain that information. And a lot of the backlash I get about retaining network traffic is, well, dwell time is, let's say, at a max of 150 days from the time we're breached to the time we realize it. That means I need 150 days of retention. That gets really expensive here. So I necessarily, if I had my ideal world, I would do full packet capture and have a year's worth of retention, but it's not realistic in most cases. So in most cases, I may have 1 to 7 days of retention, and I need to rely on my alerts and other things, or I may have to do more threat hunting. So this isn't going to be like logs that you're keeping for 30 days, 60 days a year in most cases. Unfortunately, this is going to be a very short time period. So you have to be quick to react on your detection. Okay, what I'm going to do here, because we're at the top of the hour, I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break here. We're going to use the restroom. I'll give everyone else. I know we're all in different time zones here, so it's 11 o'clock my time, Pacific. We're going to do 11:05 Pacific, so 5-minute bathroom coffee break, and I'll answer any questions we might have in the chat and Slack. And then at 11:05 Pacific, I'll come back and get into some of the Wireshark capture options. And it should be probably before the next break, we should be able to get into the labs here, but we just have a little bit of this intro stuff that we got to get through first here. Okay. So again, a 5-minute break, and I'll set a timer here and I'll be back shortly. Okay, let me switch screens here back to my slides and we'll get started again. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any questions in the Slack channel. So I will move this over to my other screen and then get started. And we can all see my PowerPoint. We can hear me. We're all good. Okay, one question, I think. Water provider recording. Yes, so I am recording I think I'm recording. Yes, I am recording. Check one more time. Yeah, it says I only have the option to pause recording and stop recording. So I'm pretty sure I'm recording. And then I will probably put this on YouTube or somewhere so we can see it. I have recorded other sessions of this as well that I've put up there. As I mentioned before, I traditionally did not put it on recording because this is a paid course, but due to COVID, I'll put it up there and share out that link as well. Cool. Thanks for the feedback on the PowerPoint as well. We can hear me. Let me let someone else into the Zoom meeting. All right, so let's get started then. And let's talk about some Wireshark capture options here. Okay, and so I'm gonna fly through these just because this takes a bit of time. So I'm just gonna highlight some important pieces. And I wanna get closer towards the labs because I was running out of time towards the lab piece. So when you're not gonna be capturing traffic in this workshop, but if you were to, up on the menu, you click on capture and you go to options. You have a few different options here. You can see that I've in a square there, I've highlighted the Wi-Fi card. You can select one or more Wi-Fi cards. One thing that I absolutely love Wireshark for doing is that a few years ago, you can see in that traffic column, there's like a little wave. And they added that because in the past, I had so many network adapters, virtual machines and things. I would have 30 different network adapters and I don't know which one I wanted to capture on or the name of which one. And so now they show you a little bit of like a wavy thing and it shows you which one has traffic. And so that helps you identify, okay, Wi-Fi is the one I want to click on because that one has the most traffic. But basically you can, as I mentioned, you can click on one of those or you can press Control or Shift and click on multiple network interfaces and capture the traffic on one or more at the same time. You can see there, number 2 at the bottom, it's got enable promiscuous mode. We just need that checked so that we can capture traffic that was not addressed to us. And then at the bottom there, you can see capture filter for selected interfaces. The thing about that, and this is something that really confused me for a while, is that you may see and hear about capture filters and then also display filters, and they're completely two different things, and they are the syntax is different. And so I've got a slide on that, and hopefully it'll explain a little better, and we can see the differences there. But I just want you to keep that in mind when I bring up capture filters, not display filters, but capture filters. This is what I'm talking about. And just briefly, the difference is that a capture filter, I am not started capturing yet. What I'm doing is I'm saying before you capture, by default, remember it captures everything in Wireshark. So I'm saying when you capture, if I spell out a capture filter, I am saying include or exclude this type of traffic. I could say only include this IP address as the source or destination IP. I could say only include traffic to or from a web server, exclude traffic like ARP or HTTP, whatever you want to include or exclude from the capture. And the reason you might want to do that is because you may have a very noisy network and you say, I really don't care about ARP. I'm looking for a vulnerability specific to HTTP traffic. So why would I capture ARP traffic or DNS or this or that? And so you may exclude things that way just because you're not interested. Now, keep in mind, if you exclude it during the capture, there's no going back in time, because what we are doing is we are just like a video camera. If I took my phone and I started capturing a conversation, I cannot later on say, oh, I was missing the frame over there in that corner. I now want to go back in time and now record this area and get this on film. No, it's real time. You're capturing in real time. And so what you need to do is that think about that. Capturing, my preference is capture everything and then filter it out later. But that may be different for your scenario for hunting or whatever else. But if you want to capture less in the beginning, this is where you do it. A display filter will take the file of 10,000 lines and narrow it down your view so you're only seeing certain things. So imagine an Excel file and you click on the top column, you start filtering things out. It's still in that Excel file. You're just viewing less at a time. Okay, I'll show you more demos later. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then on the output tab there of the capture options, you have things that you can define. You can use different buffers. You can automatically create a new file after a certain amount of time. This is useful if you're going to walk away. So you don't want to walk away for an hour with Wireshark running. It's going to crash, I guarantee it. But you may say, well, I need an hour of captures, but I don't want it to crash. So if you check that box for create a new file automatically after, and then you could say 60 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever it is. And that way it creates a new file. It saves the file every so often, kind of like auto saving in Microsoft Word. And that way you don't lose it. You're saving it periodically. Okay, and then if you go to the options tab, you could do other things like resolve MAC or network addresses, transport names. I recommend removing those, unchecking those if you're capturing. And the reason is that if you check resolve, let's say network names, what's going to happen is it sees an IP address. Wireshark is then going to do a query for what that IP address, like a reverse DNS lookup. It's going to create a packet or multiple packets for that. So you're basically adding noise to your traffic, unnecessary noise, because it's now doing its own queries every time it sees a MAC address or a network address. In my opinion, too much noise, uncheck it. Okay, so now let's look at what I mentioned. The capture filters are going to be different than display filters. So in that capture filter option, what's happening, and this drove me crazy for a long time, and actually it still does, capture filters are using Berkeley packet filter or BPF syntax. That is the same syntax that TCP dump uses. It's completely different syntax than what a display filter will use. And so if you want to say, let's just look at an IP address for this one host, 8.8.8.8. With a capture filter, you're going to do host space 8.8.8.8, and that would then only capture traffic to or from the IP address 8.8.8.8. Now, if you want to do is a display filter, it's using a different syntax, and the way that I would then take all my traffic and try and just look at traffic to or from 8.8.8.8, I would use IP.ADDR, abbreviated for address, 8.8.8.8 or equal 8.8.8.8. So it's completely different syntax. And I'll show you some differences there in a little bit when we get to the demo. But I just want to point that out, that there are differences, and it will drive you crazy because you'll try using a capture filter and do IP.ADDR equal 8.8.8.8, and it's going to say, nope, that's not correct. Just say, I've used this before. I know I have. Well, that's because you use it as a display filter and it's a different syntax. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to memorize them. I Google them all the time. I say, if you Google Wireshark capture filters or Berkeley packet filter cheat sheets, you'll find tons of these out there where they give these out. But I just show you a couple examples. Like if you're looking at just for IP packets, you could type IP. If you're looking at for TCP traffic to a specific port, it's TCP space port space the port number like 80, right? And you'll see how that differs from display filter shortly. Okay. Don't need to memorize these. You come back to these. I give you the slides for free so you can copy paste it, but I just want to show you how advanced these capture filters and display filters can get. So in other use cases. So let's say you want to run Wireshark or TCP dump or whatever it is, and you don't want to capture everything, but you're really hunting for heartbleed. Well, look at the bottom of the screen there. It's a super complicated capture filter, but that's how advanced it can get, is that you can capture only traffic related to the vulnerability heartbleed. And that way you're getting all the full packet traffic only when this event occurs. And so you can start just thinking about use cases for this. You can hunt for specific malware. You can hunt for C2 traffic, command and control traffic. You can hunt for or capture just clear text traffic. So I could do a capture filter, only capture traffic if it's HTTP, FTP, Telnet, SMB version 1, whatever you're interested in, and you're only capturing now clear traffic, so you don't have to retain as much full packet capture on disk. You only capture what you're specifically looking for. Now, if let's say malware is possibly using multiple different avenues, let's say it's first beaconing through DNS and then it exfiltrates over HTTP and then it goes over something else. Well, if you're not doing that in the capture filter, you're only looking at HTTP, you might have missed all that stuff. So again, just that disclaimer, These are really cool use cases for capture filters. However, if you do the capture filters, you're missing all the other stuff that you might have looked at: lateral movement, other beaconing, heartbeats, that kind of stuff. So use at your own discretion. All right, so some other of the basics. I'm going to skip over the basics about Wireshark, but I do want to talk about protocol dissection and why Wireshark is cool, but also you need to be a little weary of it. So TCP dump, love it. It's command line based. It's on your Kali Linux VM if you want to use that. It's a command line tool. There's no graphical interface to click buttons on. It is straight going to capture every 1 and 0 that traverses the network. Really cool, but it displays it really ugly. If you ever looked at like matrix screens or you wanted to show off to someone, this is the tool to do. It is going to just flood your screen faster than you can even see with packet information in hexadecimal or ASCII or however you want to see it. It will though, and it's the raw packets. So it'll show you just raw information there, really ugly to look at, but also it's useful in certain cases because it's not processing it, it's not doing anything else, it's just raw. Wireshark, on the other hand, is going to sniff those raw packets. You can see that raw data in the top there, the hexadecimal. It's then going to it's going to look at that and apply a protocol dissector. Protocol dissector is basically Wireshark taking a look at the packet, the raw data, and say, well, I think this looks like Zigbee, or I think this looks like HTTP, or I think this looks like Telnet, or whatever it thinks it is. And then it applies those columns below. So you could see IEEE 802.15.4 data. That doesn't show up for HTTP traffic. That doesn't show up for DNS traffic. That is very specific to what it thinks that raw data was. And so it's processing the raw data and is showing it to you in a specific way. Now, I give that disclaimer because, and feel free to answer in Slack if you've ever seen this, but every time you see port 80, does that always HTTP traffic? Or are there any other situations where you might see port 80 and it's not HTTP traffic? So go ahead and post that in the Slack channel if you've ever seen something that's not HTTP traffic that's on port 80. I'd love to hear from you. And I'll keep reading and then I'll go back to the chat and see what people say. So it's nice, the protocol dissectors, because they make it human readable and they give you things that you can expand and look at fields. Like if you ever looked at a TCP packet and the headers, trying to find the SYN flag or the ACK flag could be a little difficult, but they break it out for you. Okay. And then, so sometimes the protocol dissector is wrong, or other times, and I didn't see anyone post this specifically, but I've got, I believe in the lab there, where, has anyone heard of DNSCat? DNSCat by itself, the tool is written to exfiltrate data over DNS. So you can feed a file like credit card files, and it's then going to send the data outbound over port 53. So it looks like DNS queries, but it's really sending confidential data out of your environment over port 80. And so that's what I mean. It doesn't always have to follow the RFCs for a protocol. There's plenty of times you can do stuff. And there is one of our little labs here. I want you to remember this conversation because we're going to have a little screenshot, and it's exactly what's going to happen is there's going to be some tunneling of data. And if we just assume or take a Wireshark for its face value that, oh yeah, just because it's port 80 or 443 or whatever, it is automatically this traffic, that's not necessarily the case. Meterpreter, we talked about that already. You can customize it to have any port you want. So I can have a reverse shell over port 53, which looks like DNS traffic. Okay, so dissectors, they're cool, but they can also have downsides as well. I'll let you just kind of look at the navigation menu. I kind of describe how to capture, stop traffic, restart the capture, that kind of stuff. But I want to get a little bit further along here. So I want to describe the differences here on this slide of what we're looking at when we pull up Wireshark. So in the very top of Wireshark, you're going to see the packet list. In the middle column, or sorry, the middle row, you're going to see the details pane. And in the bottom, you're going to see the packet bytes. And so what this means is the very top, the packet list, these are all the packets within Wireshark, within the capture. And so it could be 5, it could be 10,000, it could be 100,000. Well, Wireshark would probably crash at 100,000 packets, but you could see each row there from starting at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's 14 packets on that screen, right? Each row is a different packet. But we've got different columns there, like number, time, source, destination, protocol, length, info. That's different information. But looking at packet number 1, we see the time is 00000, the source 52.42.20.106, destination 168.1.141. The protocol is TCP. The length is 54, but we don't get everything. It's a TCP packet, but what about the flags? What about the offsets? What about the MAC address? What about, there's a lot of stuff we don't see there. So if you go to that second row there, that details pane, that's where we see frame, Ethernet, Internet Protocol version 4, transmission control protocol. And we can expand those. You see the little arrows on the left-hand side. You can expand Internet Protocol version 4, and you can see the source IP, destination IP, the version, everything about the IP layer of the packet. You can dig into that. And that's what the protocol dissector is doing, is it's dissecting the raw packet, and it is then breaking it out for you. And at the bottom there, the packets bytes, we rarely look at that. There'll be a couple exceptions to that, but what I normally do is I don't want to say minimize it, but I drag and drop that lower, so I don't really see the packet bytes. I can come back to it, but it's just hexadecimal and ASCII, and there's not a lot of use cases where I pull that up. So I just bring that down, I drag and drop it lower, so that way I'm really looking at the packet list and the packet bytes, and it gives me more room on my screen. So Wireshark will do coloring rules by default, and each profile can have their own coloring rules. You could turn those on or off. You can modify those. I don't have a lot of use cases. Occasionally I'll highlight a packet, but I just kind of skip over that. Okay, and then I want to show you about how we can save or export stuff. So this is pretty cool. In Wireshark, if we've captured packets, or even if we're just looking at one in the lab files, you can save the packets. And by default, it's going to save it now as, I keep calling it PCAP, but it's PCAP NG for next generation. So if you go to File, Save As, you'll be able to then pick if it's a PCAP, PCAP NG. I don't think they have PDF options, but text, CVS, you could save it as many different formats. Older systems may not be compatible with PCAP NG, might be just compatible with PCAP. So this is how you could pick the format you want to save it as. Now, we also have an option to export, and I think this is really cool, and there's many use cases for this. So you can save data that's selected, or a narrower view of the data. So imagine you've got 10,000 packets that you've captured, and you want to narrow it down and only show HTTP traffic and send that to one of your security analysts. Well, in those use cases, you can then filter out, do a display filter, and just have HTTP traffic, and then export just the HTTP traffic, so your analyst doesn't have to look at the 10,000 packets, they look at the 50 packets. So you can filter out noise, smaller outputs, relevant views, stuff like that. Make it a little bit easier to send those exports. I use export all the time when I'm in my lab, because I want to show you 8 packets rather than 10,000. So I narrow it down. I pick the packets I want you to see, and I export just those. So it's not all my DNS and my ARP and my broadcast and all this other stuff. You're looking at specific views. So if you go to File, Export Specified Packets, you have the option here. And so what I first did is, at the very top left there, I've got a display filter in green. So it's TCP.port = 80. And what I did is I wanted to just see HTTP traffic, as I mentioned in the prior example. I then go to File, Export Specified Packets. And on the right side there, you can see now in a couple of boxes, I have options. I could give it a new file name. I could save it as different file types, all kinds of stuff like that. But then I have a grid there. So packet range, I've got all packets, selected packets, and then I've got captured packets, displayed packets. So this is telling me that if I click all packets and captured packets in the column, I would have 4,092 packets. But if I just want to export the HTTP packets after I filtered that, I could click on all packets in the row, and then in the column displayed, and that tells me that I would then have 37 packets. So it would just export the HTTP related packets. Or if I click on the row there that says selected packets and see where it says captured or displayed columns, it's 1 and 1. Well, that means basically in the gray up at the top there, I'm clicking on packet number 124. So it would just export that one packet that I was selecting. So I've got options there. I can use the grid. I could also pick on the select range, and I could say packets 122 through 130 or 122 through 124, whatever you want there. There's different options to basically pick out the packets you want to export from your dump. Maybe you want to share the packets. Let's say another scenario, you want to share the packets with your ISP or with an ISAC if you're part of an ISAC. Well, but you've got some other stuff, like you saw someone change their password, it's clear text, and you don't want to share that piece. Well, then you could exclude that and only select the packets that are relevant. So many use cases for that. Another cool thing is that you can go to File, Print, and you can print out packets. You might wonder, why in the world would I ever print out packets? It's already hard enough to look at the screen. Why would I print this out? Well, imagine if you're going to court, or I saw a couple people registered that have .gov email addresses. If you possibly need to send this to prosecution or an attorney or something like that, they may not want to show a judge or bring up in case like, hey, look at this PCAP-NG file. Well, you can actually print out the packets here, which is super cool. Or you might want to put it into an incident report, or it might have to go off to a third party, and it might just need to be in a PDF format. And so in this case, you don't have to send off a PCAP file. You can send the raw packets there. In this case, I would definitely advise you against clicking on the all packets captured, because you'd be printing out 4,000 packets on paper and you'd kill probably all the trees in your state. So I would recommend, definitely narrowing this down if the legal counsel agrees with that, and just printing out what's relevant in this case. Okay, so now this is the part that we may want to pay attention to if we're using our work computers with Wireshark for the labs. This is the only, I don't say the only, but this is the dangerous part about using the lab files I gave you. Okay, so there's my big warning banner there that extracting any objects outside of the PCAP files, the traffic that I'm sending you, this is where you can possibly export malicious content and put that onto your hard disk. So you want to be very careful with this and possibly not do this in the lab files. So what's happening is that when we take network traffic, any unencrypted traffic on the network in those PCAP files, we have everything, every 1 and 0, every hexadecimal bit that was traversed our network, we have in those PCAP files. So if there's a picture, if there's a web page, if there's an executable, whatever is traversing a clear text protocol, we can extract that binary, that picture, that whatever it is, out of the 10,000 packets, put that onto our hard drive. Really, really helpful for malware analysis, for seeing what users are doing. I'll show you a couple of demos here. And so the one weird thing though is that when you extract it, sometimes the name does not match. So if you extract, let's say a.png, alpha.png, it may be saved as 1753a5254.png. For some reason, it's got some weird naming convention. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're exporting things, that the names may not match up. And so then, and we can then take that object that we've exported out and do static malware analysis, dynamic malware analysis, file analysis, whatever we want on the file, and take a look at that. So the way we do that is in Wireshark, we can click on File, then Export Object, and then we have a couple of options. We can do HTTP, IMF, SMB, TFTP. We are a little bit limited there, but there are certain protocols that we can extract objects. And then we can save that to our hard disk. So here's an example. I have a PCAP, and I went to the local ISSA chapter here in Los Angeles, well, actually the Ventura County chapter. I visited the website. I was running Wireshark, and then I exported that out, and I could see back in the day, it was not encrypted traffic. So back in the day, it was over HTTP. I thought it was ironic that our chapter was using, it's a security organization, and we didn't have a SSL cert. But anyways, this, you could see that it does not look, it looks a little bit funky. It was not the actual version of the ISSA Ventura chapter. We're missing some things because we didn't capture the CSS or some of the styling of the website, but we can see the raw text that was there. We could see the events that were coming up. We can see there was my July 7th deep dive Wireshark course. We can see join the Slack channel, some other stuff there. So we were able to extract out the page that the user visited just by capturing full packet captures. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about profiles, and then we start getting into hands-on here. So the profiles, and this is probably one of the coolest things I found out about Wireshark, is that profiles contain customized data about Wireshark. They've got specific coloring rules, columns, unique interesting fields. And there's many use cases for this. And so by default, you're using a default profile, and it's got things like the packet number, it's got the time. And if you saw from my previous example of Wireshark, the time, it started with 0.00000.0. And, or maybe I've got the decimal point wrong, but you get the point. It started with just a relative time, 0. And then the next packet was 00000.001 or whatever the timestamp was in milliseconds after that. And the downside of that is any of you worked incident response across multiple locations. I mean, even when we took a break here, I had to say, we're going to get back at 11:05 Pacific time. And you might have been in Eastern time or Central time or Mountain time or wherever you are in the world, there's different time zones. And for some reason, we all have different ways that we handle time. And in California here, we've got in the Pacific time zone, we've got daylight savings. And so then we have different changes based off of other areas. So sometimes I'm the same time zone as Arizona, and then other times I'm not. And if you ever looked at a map, SANS does a great one. They mapped out, I think it was California or like Los Angeles, New York, Sydney, and the UK, something like that. And they map it out over 9 months. And there was, I think, don't quote me on this, but 16 different time changes that you had to look at and see, well, how does that time change based off of what date and time we were? So if you were looking at an incident over 9 months, you'd have to take into account 16 different time changes within that 9-month period. And that could be such a headache for a incident responder or forensic person looking at different geographic locations. Such a headache. So if I'm looking at a PCAP file and it says this malware was downloaded at 0000.000, that means nothing to me. I don't know when I need to look at the rest of my logs. I don't know anything else. So I may want to change my profile and have a setting where I'm looking at UTC time or a different time zone. And maybe I want to look at the month, year, day, time, different ways I want to look at the time zone. I may not want to trust Wireshark's protocol dissectors are taking the right action. And I may not want to look at the protocol as a column. I might want to look at the actual numeric value for the source and destination IP address. I may not want to, or let's say if I'm looking at SMB traffic, I may want to look at the file names of any read or writes. But if I look at HTTP traffic, there are no SMB file names. So that's not relevant and I may be wasting space. So I may want to now have profiles specific to SMB traffic, DNS traffic, HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic, malware analysis, threat hunting, all these different use cases. And rather than trying to customize Wireshark every single time I'm looking at different traffic, or even if I have 10,000 packets, I may have SMB, HTTP, DNS, and it would just take too long to start adjusting things every time. So I can have profiles that I can toggle between that are specific to each type of protocol I'm looking at or each use case. VoIP traffic, very different than HTTP traffic. Okay, so let's take a look at this. And so if you've got your VMs, this is the time to spin them up. I'm going to kind of walk you through this and then I'll give you a quote unquote lab. And so then you can create your own profile here. So I'll put it on the screen first, I'll then demo it, and then I'll give you a chance to do this as well. So if you go to Wireshark, one thing that helps is to open up a PCAP. The one that I'm going to use for demonstration is the 2017-03-25 traffic analysis exercise. To open up the zip file for the PCAPs, it is a password infected, all lowercase. And so once I open that in Wireshark, I then go to edit, go all the way down to configuration profiles. We can see that I've got default, Bluetooth, and classic. Those are already set up by Wireshark for you. I'm going to click on the plus button, and that allows me to create a new profile. You can call it whatever you want. On the screen there, I called it Demo IR Hunting. And once you create it, though, it's going to have all the default settings. So the next thing you to look at there is that you've got in the default columns, I've got packet number, I've got time, which is relative time to 0000. I've got the source IP, destination IP, protocol length, and some generic information about the packets. So some things I might want to adjust, though, I like to see packet number, a timestamp rather than a relative time, source IP address, destination IP address. I'm sorry, these are the ones that are default. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you the ones that I want you to adjust. So once we go to, we click on edit, we go down to preferences. We then can see the different columns there that we can add. And again, there are the default ones, the number, the time, the source IP, destination IP, protocol length, and info. If I go to I can then create a new column. And so I can click the plus button there and I can then add things like source port, destination port, and I can then see that at the bottom as a new column added. And don't worry, I'm going to show this as a demo if it doesn't make sense here. I can then, within this profile that we've created, I say, well, I'm tired of seeing this relative time. So I can go to view, time display format. I can then change it over to UTC date time. And then I can say, well, rather than doing automatic seconds from or milliseconds from the beginning of the capture, put it in actual seconds format. And again, I'm going to show what this looks like. And then the other thing I'm going to do is that I am going to align the columns so I can, rather than seeing everything align right, my OCD goes crazy so I can align things to the left. I'll show you how to do that. And that's where I'm going to pause on my slide. So give me 1 second here so I can switch over. If I find my mouse again, I'm going to show you my Kali Linux environment and show you what that looks like and kind of walk through this again. Okay, so I've got this pulled up. Going to share. You should all now, within a couple of seconds, you should see Kali Linux popped up here. If you do not, please let me know in the chat. Okay, I got a thumbs up. Root is the username, Tor is the password. If you are using the Kali Linux VM here, I do already have the lab files there for you. And they're going to be here within Workshop. So if you are using a Windows machine or your own machine and you downloaded the actual lab files, you'll have those. But those of you who are using the Kali Linux VM, it's on the desktop here, Workshop, Wireshark, and you've got the same lab files. I just pre-extracted them for you here. Okay. And then, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and close this just so it's out of the way. I'm going to open up Wireshark. I'm going to open a file. So I'm going to go to File, Open. I am then going to look at the root, desktop, workshops, Wireshark, PCAPs, and it's another folder called PCAPs. So it's sitting right here. And I'm going to go to lab files. And then I believe it's malicious traffic 1. And there's my 2017-03-25 traffic analysis exercise. I'm going to open that up. I see a couple questions coming in, so I'm going to pause here and look at those. Okay, so I had to explicitly set the OS type for Linux 64-bit after importing it. Otherwise, it gave me a blank screen. Okay, and then where can I get Kali Linux VM? Paul, I will, once I get through the walkthrough here and I give everyone a chance, I will go ahead and dig up that link and send that to you in the Slack channel as well. As I mentioned a couple of times, just reiterate myself, you can do these labs on your Windows machine, Mac machine, any other machine you have. As I mentioned, I would just not do the export anything outside of Wireshark. But again, if you don't feel comfortable with that because there are malicious binaries in there, then I'll give you the VM link in just a minute here. Okay. So we can all see the, oh, and thank you, Jimmy, for posting the VM download there. So we should see here that I've got my Wireshark opened up here. I've got the packet list, the details. I've already minimized. So if you open up yours, you'll probably see here, there's the bytes pane at the bottom. As I mentioned, it's just too busy. So what I do is I just drag this down here. So I'm just looking at the details pane and I'm looking at the packet list here. And so I've kind of got this as a 50-50 split on my screen. Okay. And so the next thing I want to do is, let me go back here on my slides just so I'm following along with you. Okay, so you can see here I've got the, let me go back to my default profile so it looks a little bit more like yours. And we can see I have the packet number starts at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got the time, it starts with all zeros, and then it's just milliseconds thereafter, so that's not super helpful. Source IP, destination IP, protocol. This may be DHCP, but it also may be some type of DDoS attack. I don't really know yet, so I don't want to trust that this is really the protocol. The length, in my use cases, most of the time the length of the packet doesn't really matter for me. And then the info is somewhat helpful, but the info really depends on the packet and the protocol I'm looking at of what I might want to see here. So that being said, I want to go ahead and create a new profile. So I'm going to go ahead here to edit, configuration profiles. We can see I have quite a few here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete a couple of these. Okay, so I'm just going to call and add a new one here. I'm just going to call it Wireshark Workshop. Okay, now I've created that, so I can click OK. In the bottom right corner here, we can see I can toggle through my default, the new Wireshark workshop, any of the ones that we create here, I can toggle through these things. And we can see if I click on SMB, which you won't have, but if I click on SMB, look at this. I've got now stream number, I've got SMB response time, SMB read length, SMB session ID. If I keep scrolling, I've got file name. So this is really specific. File name is specific to looking at SMB traffic, right? And if I'm trying to filter here just so I can show an example. I've got so many windows. Move this over. Bear with me. Okay, this one didn't have any SMB traffic, but I could easily just click on these and I could filter and sort by, let's say, file names, and just pull out all the file names over SMB if there were SMB traffic. So there's different use cases, and I can quickly just toggle without reopening the PCAP file. I can toggle back and forth between these. So I digress. We were looking, I'm going to click back on the Wireshark workshop. So we've got that profile selected. We can see that in the bottom right corner. I am going to do some of my favorite things here. So I'm just going to minimize the bytes pane so I can just have the details pane and I can have the packet list. So I'm just going to minimize this. And now this is going to stay for this profile. It's going to have this view as long as I have this profile pulled up. Next, I'm going to click on edit. I am then going to go to preferences. I then going to click on columns, and we can see here that I have these columns that are default for this profile. And so some of the things, I just want to make sure I'm following my slides correctly here too. I don't want to have protocol. I don't trust protocol. So I'm going to uncheck it. You could easily press the negative button there, the minus button, but I like just unchecking it to hide it because maybe later on I change my mind and I don't want to have to reset it up. So either option, you could uncheck it. You could press the negative button. It doesn't really matter for this use case. Okay. The other thing I find confusing is source and destination. Well, I don't really fully understand, is that source IP, port, what source? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename these by double clicking on them. SRC, and then underscore, just my preference, IP. And then for the destination address, I'm going to click on that one and just do DST underscore IP. And this just helps me keep in mind, okay, that's source and destination IP. Okay, I also don't really care about the length, so I'm going to uncheck the length of the packet. It doesn't matter to me. I now want to add the source and destination port numbers. I think this is valuable. So I click the plus sign, and it has a new column here. I'm going to double click on the title and call it SRC underscore port. Okay, and then I'm going to go on the type here, and it says number. So I'm going to double click on number, and I'm going to go to source port. There's a source port resolved and source port unresolved. I want source port unresolved because I don't want it to resolve that and tell me, well, port 80 is HTTP. I want the number, so unresolved. Okay, I'm going to click the plus sign again. This time I'm going to do it for the destination port, so same process, DST underscore port. I'm going to click on the number in the type column, and I'm going to type destination, or D for destination, look for destination port unresolved. Okay, so I have that. Now, the one thing here, though, that's a little weird is I like seeing it more along the lines of my view where I've got source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port. That's just how I'm used to seeing things. So what I want to do is then just drag these around. This is just my preference. So I'm going to click on source port, just hold my left button on my mouse and just drag it up here right between the source IP and destination IP. Now I'm going to take my destination port column and I'm going to move that up here right after destination IP. So that looks a little bit more along the lines of how I'm used to seeing things. Okay. And so then I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And we can see now on my view here, my columns, I have the packet number, time, then I have source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port. Now my OCD is driving me crazy because source port is all the way right aligned and it's kind of hard to see source port 68 here because it's hugged all the way to the right side there. So I'm going to right click on the column and then I'm going to say align left. Same thing for the destination port. I'm going to right click on that and click on left align. Okay. And now if any point, if I wanted to even move these around, so I showed you to drag the columns around in where we were editing the columns, but the other thing I could have done here too is I can just click on the the source port column here, and I can just drag this over. So I can rearrange these columns however I want, whether it's this view or while we were actually editing the columns. The other thing I can do here is if it's, let's say, oh, source port, I don't really care about that anymore. I can either go back into that editing view we had, or I can just right click on it and I can just deselect the checkbox here. So I can uncheck source port and it's gone. The column view is gone. But if I change my mind again, I say, no, actually, I really did want source port. I just right click again and I can just check box next to source port and we have it back again. Okay, so a couple different ways to skin the cat there. All right, so now let me just look at the next step that I wanted you to do. So now I want to change that time. And so if I click on the time column, we can see again that it's just starting at 00 or 0.0000, it's milliseconds from the start of the capture. Not super useful. I don't know if this is 2016, 2017, 18, 19, 20. I don't know when this was captured. Maybe it was in the future of 2021. So what I want to do is now go to view. Now go down to time display format. And then I'm going to check here. I've got to do this in 2 steps. UTC date time of day. So I'm going to click on this one. And then I've got to do the same thing again, because the problem with this is that it's just too long. I don't really care about the milliseconds. Maybe you do, and you can leave that. But for me personally, I'm going to go back to view, time display settings, or time display format, apologize. And then rather than automatic from capture file, I'm going to click on just the seconds. That's all I really care about. So that made it a little bit smaller there. And now I can see 15, 48, 19 was that first packet. Okay, so that's helpful for me. And you can kind of just rearrange these columns based off of how you like. You know, source IP, it might be a little too long. I'll just drag these, whatever works well for your screen size. Okay, so we did that. And then I do want to show you now, before we go into a lab, and now you follow this, and I'll see if there's any questions in Slack. You might say, cool, but I don't want to, every time, you know, I build this out in this workshop, how do I now take this profile and give it to my teammates or take it to a new computer that I got without recreating all these steps? Because sometimes you build out some really cool profiles and it takes a lot of work. Well, what we can do here is I can click on the help button in Wireshark, and then I can go to about Wireshark. And then if I click on the folders tab, I can see here that there is a, where is it? It is the personal configuration. So in Wireshark here, it's going to be in root config Wireshark. So if I click on this, it's going to open this up. And then there's a profiles directory. So in my profiles directory, look at this. I've got my SMB, template, Bluetooth, Wireshark. This is the brand new one that we just created. So I could easily just copy paste this or take these profiles with me whenever I go. The other thing I want you to take a look at too here is I've given you some. And so as we get to more advanced, I'd say, labs where you've got 10,000 packets, I don't tell you what protocols are there. So you may need SMB, you may need HTTP, you may need some other types of profiles. You can build them out, but for the sake of time and just to be helpful here, the other thing I did is if we open up, we go back to the desktop, at least for us who are using Kali, and I go into the profiles that I shared with you, and the rest of us, the Windows users or Mac users, it's the profiles zip file that I gave you. I've given you some other ones here. So some things you can take a look at, for example, like DNS, I can just extract this. I can take this DNS folder and I can move this over here. And so now I move this into my Wireshark profiles directory. And if I go back to Wireshark, I can click on the profiles at the bottom right and look at that. Now all of a sudden I've got a DNS profile. So very easy way to basically import and export these different profiles that you'll be working with here. So I've given you a couple that may help you with later on labs as they get harder, or you can get the practice in building them yourself out and finding out what works for you. Either option, but I give those to you as a gift. So that brings us up here to our next lab and a break. So essentially what you're going to do is what I did, is you're going to create a new profile called IR Workshop. You're going to remove the length and the protocol from view. You're going to add columns of a source port, destination port. Make sure you left those or align them left so I don't go crazy. And then you're going to change the time and date and to UTC, and you're going to then make it in seconds. So pretty much I want your end result to look similar to my Wireshark profile that I have on the screen here. Okay, and so I'm going to then switch over to my PowerPoints, and that way you can go ahead and see the lab. And they should also be in the very first slide, and also in Slack, I did give you the link to download the PDF version of my slides. So let me go here, share this. And so what I'm gonna do then also is I'm gonna leave this up. I think we can all see my PowerPoint, hopefully, and that it has the lab instructions. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to go through the lab. It should only take a couple of minutes to set the profile up, explore, play with it if you'd want, do different views, set it up. This is a learning time. And then at noon Pacific time, we'll get started again. So I'll leave this up, but noon Pacific, we'll get started. If there's questions, please post them in the Slack channel. I'll take a look at that during the break. Okay, so here is one question. Where are the profiles only included in the Kali VM? No, Eric, let me repaste this. Give me 1 second. So this was kind of the instructions I did at the top of the screen. I'm just going to repaste this here. Those are the lab files, the GeoIP database, which is probably going to be our next one, and then the Wireshark profiles. You can also find other profiles online, but that link I gave you there, those are a couple of profiles I've developed. And I should probably put these on GitHub so that way, as I build them out further, you can all see them in the future. But those are some of the ones I've used and found for some of the labs that we have that may help you later on. Just keep that in mind as you do some of the harder challenge labs. Okay, so again, noon Pacific time. And then someone's asking about the slides. Yes, that's not included there. So give me a second while you're working on that. I will post the slides as well. Give me 1 second there. But the rest of you, I will see back at 12 Pacific here. So somehow I got kicked out of my own Zoom meeting. Let me get reset up here. I was hoping everyone didn't get kicked out. Okay. I think we're set. Okay, we can see the PowerPoint. We can hear me. I was definitely out for a while and I didn't realize it. Can I get a thumbs up in Slack if you can hear me and see my screen? Thank you. Okay. Very good. I was talking to myself for a while. Okay, so let's talk about protocol-specific columns. As always, if there were any issues with that lab, please let me know in the Slack channel, and I'll get to those. So protocol-specific columns, we saw how that could be useful by looking at the SMB profile and the DNS profile and starting to build our own stuff out. So personally, I like to build out, I guess, profiles around specific things I'm looking for and also that I see a lot of. And a lot of clear text protocols, but also even HTTPS protocols. So these are some, for example, that I might set up. If I have an HTTP profile, I might be interested in things like the user agent string, the GET request, host name. But if I'm looking at HTTPS traffic, unfortunately, it's supposed to be encrypted, so I'm not going to see a user agent string, but I sure can see a certificate server name. And I can look at the host that the end user was going to, and so I can get some valuable information there. We've already talked about SMB and how I might want to look at file names. If it was DHCP, I can identify host names, so I can start tracking down, okay, well, I looked at this malicious file that was downloaded, but whose IP was associated with that at that point in time. And so I can look at DHCP traffic to identify the endpoints. Okay, so I showed you one way to create columns. And it works for simple things like source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port, protocol, basic stuff like that. However, there are some other types of columns that we can add that are a little bit more complicated, and you may not know exactly what they're called, and it may be a little bit more challenging to build out. So I'm going to show you a little cheat way of how to build out your own columns while looking at traffic. And you can take the samples I gave you, you could run packet captures on your own network, and then you can create them that way. There's many different ways, but having something that you're looking at that you might want in the future is the easiest way to build these columns out. So if you're looking at, for example, HTTP traffic, and you want to know, rather than just seeing, okay, there's a packet like 66 there on the screen, I see the time, it went from 192.168.22.94 to 23.218.98.249, and it was the source port of blah, 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 and destination of 80, and that's it. I might want to know more information like, well, what is the host? What was the actual, I don't want to have to figure out what 23.215.98.249 is, and I don't want to go every single packet, Google, well, reverse DNS lookup, who is this? So what you can do is that in the HTTP request, so if a browser is going to a website like google.com, and let's pretend that they weren't using a certificate, so it was HTTP, they went to google.com and they did a request, that request, that first GET request, you're going to be able to see within that packet there, you're going to be able to see the host name. And so one thing that I like to do is I like to look at that in a column format rather than digging into each HTTP request packet. I like to be able to see that as a column and even sort on that as a column. So what you can do is, this really applies to almost anything within the details pane of Wireshark. You can drill down. So for example, on the screen there, I've got the hypertext transfer protocol section. I drill down into that and I see the host section, which says www.msf tncsi.com. And if I right click on that, I can apply it as a column. And so that allows us to build columns out without knowing what the actual makeup of that column is going to be. And so it'll make a little more sense here in a second when I demo that. Similarly, we could do that for HTTPS. We can't see the host name because it is encrypted, but you can look at the SSL handshake. And so if we look at the SSL handshake, we filter by SSL handshake type 1. We can drill down. This is the hardest one to find, and you'll see me stumble through this. So I always have to come back to my notes. But if you look at the handshake and you look at the client hello, you drill down into the extension server name, you drill down further into the server name, you're going to see a server name. I know it's a little bit confusing, but if we follow this slide and I'll do a walk along as well, you'll see that we find there that in that SSL handshake, that what comes across is the server name of the system the user is going to, which is super cool because if you've got malware that's doing, let's say phoning home, or it's doing a transfer or whatever, and they actually got a certificate, which by the way, majority of the malware I take a look at in malware analysis is not using any encryption yet, just because they don't want to waste the time. But in the rare cases they do use encryption, like WannaCry, they had a SSL TLS cert in the dropper. In those cases, you can actually see the domain they're going to, even though you don't get to see all the traffic that's passed. It's still some indicators we can take a look at. And if this does turn out to be malicious, we can then take that as an IOC and ban that across our entire organization. Super cool stuff. So we're getting into a lab here. I'm going to walk through this real quick. And then, so let me exit out of my screen share. I'm going to go back over to my Kali box and show this to you. Switch over. And then I'll put this back on the screen for you. But I'm just going to walk through it so those of us who don't have a VM pulled up, we can still see it in action. Okay, so what I am going to do here is I've got my traffic analysis 2017-03-25 traffic analysis PCAP pulled up. And the first step, there's two pieces. We're going to create a profile called IR HTTP traffic, and then another one called IR HTTPS traffic profiles. Okay. Now, for the first one for HTTP, what I'm going to do is the same process. I know some of you are thinking ahead, like, well, we already did this in the last lab. Why do I have to keep doing it? I want the practice. If you're smart about it, you'll create kind of like a template profile and then just copy and paste it so you don't have to create the source and destination port every single time. But I just want to have that repetitive hands-on practice for you. So what we're going to do is edit configuration profiles. I'm going to create 2 new profiles. Oops, what did I do there? Plus sign. Okay, I'm going to call it IR-HTTP-traffic. Okay, I'm going to create another one. It's going to be IR-HTTPS-traffic. Okay, I've got those 2 new ones created. Now I'm going to focus first on the HTTP traffic. So I'm going to switch my profiles in the bottom right corner there. Go to IR HTTP traffic. We're going to look at hypertext transfer protocol. I'm going to minimize the bytes pane just so I've got that view that I like. Okay, and now we're going to do the same things we did in the last lab. We are going to remove the length and the protocol. So we could do it the other way I taught you, or I can right click here at the top and I can just uncheck protocol and I can uncheck length. Okay, just mixing it up a little bit there. Now I want to add the columns for source port, destination port, HTTP host, and then user agent string. Okay, so I'm going to go back and do it the first way I showed you to get the source port and destination port. So I go on edit and I go to preferences, click over to columns, and now I'm going to add, just like we did before, source port and change the type to source port unresolved. I'm going to now create DST_port. I'm going to click on the type and I'm going to scroll down to destination port unresolved. I'm going to move them just so that they're the same way I like it, where source IP, then source port, destination IP, destination port. And I'm just going to change the names to match. Source IP. I'm going to change destination to dest IP. Okay, same thing we did before. And now I'm going to click OK. Drives me crazy that the source and destination port are right aligned. So I'm going to right click and left align, right click on destination port, left align. Looks much better in my opinion. We also want to change the time and date. So I go to view, scroll down to time display format. We want UTC. I go back to view, time display format. I go to seconds. All this is the same so far. Okay, now we get into the new stuff. So now the step 3 here says I want to add, we already did A and B, which is source and destination port. But now the new things that I want to do is add the HTTP host and the user agent string. So what I want to do here is you can scroll down if you'd like, but at the bottom I can see that there are 9,443 packets. So what makes it a little bit easier is if I just type in the display filter area, which is the bar up here right under all the menu options, and I just do http.request. And one other thing I want to point out is you see how it's red? That means that my syntax is incorrect. So if I type things that are wrong, host, this is not right. But if I type HTTP, see it turn green, that means that is correct syntax. So it's kind of like a spell check, if you will. So I'm going to type http.request, press enter. Now these are all the HTTP requests, and you can see at the bottom it filtered it down from 9,443 packets. We're now viewing 76 packets, so much easier to look at. I am now going to take a look at in the details pane. We can see here I've got a specific section for hypertext transfer protocol. I'm going to click the little arrow to the left, and that gives us more details. I now see the host. So if we look at the columns in the packet view, I can see the number of the packet, time, source port, source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port, and info. But I don't know what 23.215.98.249 is. I don't know what that IP address is. I'm not smart enough to memorize every IP and host name on a real-time basis. So what I want to do there is down here in the details pane where it says host, I'm going to right click on that. Right? And I could do this for anything, for user agent, connection, whatever I want. In this case, I'm going to right click on host, apply as column. Now we have a new column, and I'm just going to kind of move to the side here. I'm going to minimize the time so I can see that. I now see all the hosts in this packet capture. So I can sort by alphabetical here, and I can see all the different hosts, the ones that are www. These hosts, so there was some type of get or post or something to a URL that did not have a domain name. So it was actually a post. That's a little concerning because my users, as I mentioned before earlier in this workshop, they don't type out 77.225.141.195. And then if we look at the actual URI, I mean, no one's typing this out. http://77.225.141.195. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's maybe something that just pops up as something I want to look at a little bit later, right? But at least I have this column. The other cool thing here is that if we look at the HTTP request information here, I can see things like user agent string. So if I right click on this, I can apply as a column as well. And now I have this column, which I find really helpful because let's say that one of my favorite quotes for cybersecurity comes from The Art of War, Sun Tzu, and that you essentially, I'll paraphrase, but you need to know yourself and the enemy if you want to win the battle. If you know just yourself and not the enemy, or just the enemy and not yourself, for every battle you'll win, you'll also lose one. And if you don't know yourself or your enemy, you're going to lose all your battles. And so I think that's super relevant to us. And I'm going to go for a Sans quote now. They say, know normal, find evil. And so if you, let's say, have a standard gold image and you only allow, let's say, Internet Explorer or Chrome or Firefox, you have certain browsers you allow in your environment rather than letting anyone do whatever they want. How easy is this if I just sort? I click on the column that says user agent. Kind of messed up my view, but if I go back here, I can now look for differences. Look here, I've got Mozilla 4.1, but I've got Trident 4.0 versus this one. These are different here. If I scroll down further, I might be able to see something else. How weird would it be? This one says Microsoft Crypto. How would it be if you've got an all Windows shop and you see a user agent string, and that user agent string says something about Kali Linux or Metasploit or Nmap, right? And a lot of people don't realize this, but as I was playing with Wireshark, do you know that almost every offensive security tool has a user agent string that identifies that tool? Like Nikto, There is no valid use other than pen testing and evil that you see NICTO, right? And possibly you could say, well, my blue team and purple teams, we use NICTO to kind of check ourselves. I get it, but it's an offensive test. So if you don't have an authorized use for Kali Linux or NICTO or Nmap, these tools, even if you put them in stealth mode, you're going to see NICTO as the user agent string. You're going to see Nmap. If you run a SS, I think it is, for stealth scan for Nmap, a stealth scan, that's what it's called. You're going to see Nmap as the user agent string, unless they configure that otherwise. But most people don't know that. Most pen testers I've talked to in the past don't know that. So my point there is that you can use some of these things and you can get creative with the columns and how you do this. Maybe you want to have the full URI as to see what the actual request is, not just the host name. Make that a column. As much as your heart desires, you can make these columns however you'd like. You could start seeing, though, as you scroll, it starts getting a little bit crazy to see all this stuff, but whatever columns you want. You can make another one called IR HTTP requests or user agent string, and you can just toggle between these so it's not so crazy. I'll show you a quick tip here. Let's say I did want to have one just as user agents. I can go back to my profiles, that directory we talked about earlier. I see the IR HTTP traffic directory. I can just copy it, paste. Now I'm going to just rename this one to user agent. Okay, so now I can go back here to Wireshark. I should be able to switch over my profiles. Something's going on here. It's mad at me. Oops, there we go. It's kind of freezing. I think I have too many VMs running. Let's give it a second to calm down. There we go. Okay, so now IR HTTP traffic. So that's kind of a clone of just the regular one. But now I can get more specific, like I don't really want host here. So this is just a quick cheat way to now just get the user agent string. Remove that. So now I'm just doing that. So if you feel like your screen's getting too overwhelmed with all the different columns, you can break those down further. And now you just have these different ones and quickly toggle between these. So now maybe I don't need user agent string here. So I can see just host on this one. If I go back and flip over here, I've got user agent string. I'm still looking at the same packet, but I can quickly get between these different views and look for the information I want. So that's that. I am, oh, we've got the HTTPS one. So let me walk through that quickly, and then I will let you practice it yourself. So we created the IR HTTPS traffic profile, but it's just default again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize that bytes pane so I can see a little bit better. I am going to, just like the other ones, we're going to remove protocol from the columns. I'm going to remove length. I am going to rename source and destination. I'm going to do that right here, actually. Edit column. And I'm now going to, it's a little bit hard, and this is why I like doing it from the other view. You can see it's a little bit challenging to rename it here, but src IP. I'm going to right click on destination, edit, DST _ IP. Got those. I still now, and I'm going to see if we can go into transmission control protocol here. I just want to show you that there's many ways to skin the cat. We're going to, rather than going into the edit profile, we're going to go here and click into transmission control protocol. And now we can see that the dissector has broken this down, and I should be able to see source and destination port. So I see source port right here. We can right click on this, apply as column. I can click on destination port, right click, apply as column, right? And so now I can just drag these like we did before and put them in the, and my VM is really lagging here. I apologize. Let me give it a second just to unfreeze. Okay, there it is. I'm going to, and you can see it already left aligned. So this might be an easier way of doing this. Again, I just want to show you the different ways of doing stuff. I'm just going to leave the names there for the sake of time. In the lab, what I tell you to do is now do the TLS handshake, basically. Look at the handshake and get the server name. Okay, and I also tell you to do the time and date, but you know how to do that now. I'll let you do that. So what I want to do now to get the SSL handshake information that I'm interested in is up in the display filter. I'm going to go ahead and clear this out by clicking this little X in the display filter. And now I've got all my packets displayed again. Now what I'm going to do is SSL It's really lagging for me here. SSL dot handshake dot type equal 1. Okay. The one thing I have noticed is that if you don't see it in the first packet, that might not be necessarily a problem. There's certain packets you're going to see this, what we need, and certain packets you won't. So I'm going to try on this, this first packet, which is packet number 2263, and let's see if we can find it there. So I'm going to look at the packet details pane, and I'm going to look at the secure socket layer. I want to click on that. It's then going to say TLS version 1.2. I'm going to expand that. I'm then going to look at the handshake protocol client hello. I'm going to expand on that. And then within here, I'm going to look for the extension that's called server name. So I'm going to scroll down, and in this case, I do not see it. And so this is what I'm saying. We might have to look at the next packet, the packet number, in my case, 2165. Let's see if it's there. Now I see it. See how the extension's different? So if I'm just going to go back to the other packet, the 2263. I don't have the one called extension server name, but if I click on this other packet, 2165, I do have the extension called server name. So I won't go into a whole bunch of detail on that, but you might have to click through a couple packets to find this. But once you see extension server name, expand that. We then see at the bottom, server name, indication extension, expand that. And then finally we're there. It took quite a bit, but we finally got to it. Server name, and we can see in this one's www.streetcrime.com. I want to right click on that one and then apply as column. So now what it's giving me, and I can basically, I'll remove this display filter by clicking that X in the display filter area at the top. What I can do is, I'm just going to move over to the side of the server name. I can click on this. And I hate that it always pushes me to the side when I do that. But what I can do is I can filter here, and I can see all the packets that in this server name column that are going to that basically have a server name. So if I just scroll through this, we could see that there's Microsoft.com and then Street Crime. So these are the only two HTTPS websites that a user visited that at least have a valid certificate that we could get the name from. Okay, so I was able to identify a domain name. And this is cool because most people say, well, HTTPS, SSL, TLS traffic, it's encrypted. We can't see it. There's no point. I get that. I can't tell exactly what they did there. I can't see if a file was downloaded. I can't see a lot of things, but at least I can look at the domain name, and now I can Google that domain name. I can do my threat intel on that. I could say, when was streetcrimes.com registered? Is it on a blacklist? Or is my ISSA, I can't even say it, ISAC, are they aware of this? What is this, a good domain, bad domain? We can do more information on this. If it's registered in the last 72 hours, immediately it's, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I think this is probably malicious. I can correlate it against Alexa top 1 million, and I can do a lot of things with this domain name, but that gives me some insight into what's going on. Okay, let me go here, pull this up. I think that's all I want to talk about here. I think there's a question in the chat, and then I'm going to put the lab back up here. So the question is, didn't know that, so will come handy. Okay, someone's saying that piece was handy. Thank you. And then Ben, will the webinar recording link be made available later on? Absolutely. So I'm recording it. At least I think I am. And if not, I recorded one with an OWASP chapter, so it's going to be very similar. And that one is on YouTube. So I will provide both of those in case I focused on different areas, and you could take a look at those. So absolutely. Okay. Let me switch the slides back over, and I'll give you a few seconds to work on this. Okay, so I'll give you maybe a few minutes here to do what we just did. What you're going to do is basically the same thing. You're going to create your HTTP traffic, and then you're also going to create your IR HTTPS traffic, and then play with those a little bit. These are probably the two most useful profiles that I use on a regular basis. So I'll give you maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do that. And then I'll check back in here in 5 minutes and see how everyone's doing in Slack. And then if we need some more time, we'll give an extra 5 minutes or so. Okay. So another question here in Slack. Okay. Same question. Yes. So definitely we are recording, and we'll either have this one or another version available on YouTube. Okay, any other questions? Feel free in Slack. Otherwise, start working on the lab, creating those 2 profiles and taking a look at how that can help you out. All right, in Slack there, how are we looking as far as finishing those? Do we need a few more minutes? Okay, a couple thumbs up. I think that means they're good. All right, give me 1 second and we'll start here. Okay, mic's on. I think video's on. We should be good here. Thanks for the thumbs up in the chat. All right. Let's talk about GeoIP. So this is one of the coolest things, in my opinion, that I've discovered over the years. Unfortunately, in Wireshark, GeoIP isn't built into it, right? So it's, I don't want to say it's dumb because it does a lot of great things, but it doesn't have a lot of other feeds like threat intel or anything like that. I love tools like, for example, Sumo Logic when I'm in there and I could just do a cross-reference into the CrowdStrike database or GeoIP and it's built into that stuff. It helps me kind of get some more insight. And not saying that I can immediately just pick out good versus evil based off of geographic location, nor is it saying that GeoIP info is 100% accurate, but it gives me things to start looking at. And so it all is in context of your organization. If you are a 4-person medical shop in Los Angeles or plastic surgery company, and you only take care of people in your city, then you're probably not doing a lot of traffic to and from that's legitimate to China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, et cetera. So it's probably pretty common that you're going to see traffic locally. Maybe some people will come from other states to get some procedures done, but you can kind of, see outliers that are not coming from the Los Angeles area. And so, as I mentioned, I don't want to make be overly judgy, but a lot of times organizations that don't do work outside the US or Canada or Mexico, most of the traffic that's coming in and out of their network from other countries is bad. And there's also, even if you do work in other countries, there are some specific countries that are on the NSA list, specifically China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, that are the top attackers. And so those may be things that you don't say is evil necessarily, but those are things that you might want to watch out for. So different use cases for GeoIP info. There's paid versions that you can get that's a little more accurate, but there's also the free version. The ones I gave to you, if you're trying to use this in production, I'd probably go pay for it or get the most latest update. The one I have here is a couple years old, but it's consistent, so I use it. But you can go download the Mad Max free GeoIP, the latest version. It may still be on Lite 2. It may be on Lite 3. I haven't looked at it in a while. But you can download the city, the country, and the ASN. Download each of those, and you now have the database locally that you can use with Wireshark. So the setup for this. So what you want to do is that there's a few ways of doing this, but basically you want to extract the zip files or the compressed files of the ASN, the city, and the country. And then you want to place it in location. It doesn't really matter where that is. I personally, in Windows, I like to put it in C and then create a directory on my C drive called GeoIP. You may have a different preference, put it wherever you want. In Linux, I think it's just default. It goes into USR share GeoIP. So if it's already set up in that path within Wireshark, let's just leave it there. And that way we don't have to build the path out. So what you'll want to do is go into Wireshark. I recommend using the 2017 PCAP file that we've been working on. Just open it up before you start this. It just helps out. Go into preferences, go to name resolution, look at max mine database directories, click edit. And then for the Linux users, you probably don't need to edit it because it's probably already set for user share GeoIP. But the rest of us, we may need to build a path. So as Windows users, definitely we need to build the path, add in C:\GeoIP or wherever you put it. And we want to drop in the .mmdb files directly into the path that we put there. So the one thing I just want to, it's a caveat. If you extract the GeoIP databases, their tars or zip files or whatever they are, they're going to extract and create directories. So you can see there at the top, I've got GeoIP, Lite 2, ASN, and then a number. That's a direct folder. So I cannot dump those 3 folders in the GeoIP directory. They need to be in the root of GeoIP, the actual .mmdbs. You need to have 3 of them in the root of the folder that you're mapping to Wireshark. So that'll make more sense in a second here. So we go into preferences, name resolutions, click on edit for max mine database directories. And we then add in there the directory where we're keeping the .mmdb files. So if you have them in 3 different folders, you need to map all 3 directories. I think the easiest thing is take all 3 .mmdb files, dump them into the GeoIP folder so they're sitting in the root, and then you just add that one path of C GeoIP. Okay. And then you may or may not need to restart Wireshark. And then once we restart Wireshark, we can expand the packets detail pane and we can look at the source and destination GeoIP info. We could add those as columns. So essentially in the details pane, you are going to expand IP version 4. You're going to go down further. You should see source or destination GeoIP. You can expand that further, and then you can get specific things like, well, I really want to know the city or the country or the ASN or whatever it is. You could do all or one of these, but you could make these each columns, which is super helpful. I like to do country code and possibly city, but sometimes they say, okay, well, it's Oregon and USA, but who owns that? And so seeing that Amazon owns it gives more context to my investigation to see that, oh, well, if it's Oregon and it's US and it's Amazon, it's probably an EC2 instance or it's something with an AWS. Okay, and so we can get stuff like this. We can see our GeoIP info and we can see specifics like country or state, or we can see all of it combined, but it helps us sort. And so we're looking at a PCAP file, and we can very quickly isolate things and say, well, let me just look for anything that's outside the US, or let me look for anything that's in China. And so you could see there in the display filter, I've set here, I'm looking for all IP traffic and not, so it also is not IP geoinfo country equals United States. So basically that's saying I'm looking for all IP traffic that is outside the US. And that's going to then give me things like China and Denmark and wherever else my traffic is going to or from, I'm going to see all that stuff. So that's super useful as well. So the lab here that we're going to work on is that we're going to switch back over to the IR HTTPS traffic profile that we created in the last lab. We are then going to extract the ASN, city, and country zips, and we're going to put that in a GeoIP folder for the Windows users, or if you're in the Linux users, you drop it into the user share GeoIP. It may already be there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the GeoIP directory to Wireshark. We're going to edit the path and make sure it's there. We're then going to take a look at our malicious traffic 1, the PCAP that we've been working on. And we're then going to start looking at things and the different GeoIP info. We're going to set the source and destination GeoIP info as columns. And we're then going to sort for that, look for different countries outside the US. I give you that bonus display filter if you want to quickly sort for that, or if you just want to click on the columns and sort that way as well. But I want you to get a little play around a little bit with this. So let me do a quick walkthrough, and then I'll give you a few minutes to play with that yourself. So let me switch screens. Okay, you should be seeing now my Wireshark, my Kali box. And what I want to do here is I'm going to switch over to the HTTPS profile at the bottom here. I'm already on it. Great. Okay, and so now I want to go to my desktop. And I've got the workshops, Wireshark. And those of you Windows users that download this, you'll have your GeoIP database. You're going to right click and extract these on the Kali machine. I already have them in 3 directories here. So this is the one thing I want to warn you about. You don't want to just grab these folders and move them. What you want to do is actually grab the database files in here. So these .mmdb files, these are the ones that we want. And so I'm going to right click and copy. And I want to put it in location that is set up within Wireshark, or that we set up in Wireshark. So I'm going to open up, I've copied this, but let me go back over to Wireshark. And if I go over, there's a couple ways to find this information. But I'm going to go over here to edit preferences. And I think it was in advanced off memory. No. Where is it? Give me 1 second just to find it. Name resolution, that's what it is. Okay, so preferences, name resolution. And although if I scroll down to the bottom, I can see this MaxMind database directories. I click edit. And so us Linux users here, we already have this. For everyone else, you're going to click the plus sign. You're going to add GeoIP or wherever you're going to put these things. Okay, it's not going to make sense, so I'm just going to delete that. And so for us Linux users here, we see that this is where they want it. Okay, and then I'm going to Okay, get out of this. I'm going to minimize Wireshark, and I need to now move these .mmdb files into the right place. So I'm going to open up another window here, and I need to go to USR. Oops. Location, computer, USR. I already forgot where it was supposed to be. Okay, just can't remember where it was. Oh, share and then GeoIP. Okay, so share. GeoIP. Okay, and it looks like I already have them in here from a prior lab, but essentially what I'm going to do, I'll delete these just so you can see. What I'm going to do is copy these, paste it in here. I then want to go back. So that was the ASN. So now I need to go to the city, copy this one, paste it in here. I then go back to country, grab the .mmdb, paste it in here. So I've got those three. I've got the ASN, the city, and the country. Those are all in here. I may need to restart Wireshark. Windows users, most of the time, you do have to do that. Okay, I've opened up the 2017-03-25 traffic analysis exercise. I am in the IR HTTPS traffic profile. And so what I want to do now is take a look in my details pane here at something that says IP version 4, expand that out, and we can see that I've got the destination GeoIP, right? Because obviously the source here is a local address, so it's only going to show me the destination. Now, what you can do there is you can apply this whole thing as a column. So it's going to show you Dublin, IE, ASN. That might be what you want. Or you can expand this further, and I could say, no, I really just want the 2-letter country code, and I can apply that as a column. So just for simplicity here, I'm just going to do the whole thing. I'm going to take destination GeoIP, apply as a column. We've got that. And now I also want to click on a packet where the source IP is going to be a non-private IP. So I probably got to scroll around a little bit. I can see something here. This 180 looks like it's a public IP. So in this case, I want to do the same thing. Go to Internet Protocol version 4. I look at the source GeoIP now. I right-click on this. I'm going to apply this as a column. And in that case, I'm going to now have the 2 different columns here. And the 2 different columns are going to have I'm gonna be able to see that back and forth. I've got the destination GeoIP there. And then if I scroll all the way to the right, did I not do that right? Right click again, apply as column. Let me scroll to the side. Now I've got the destination and the source GeoIP. Oh, now I've got it twice. So it's just, as you can see, when you've got all these columns, it starts to get a little bit crazy sometimes. So let me remove this second one. And that's why you might want to just do the country code, but it really depends on what you're working on because this can get a little bit excessive here. So you've got the source GeoIP, you've got the destination GeoIP info, we've got all of this sitting here. And we can see that there's some stuff, in the US, we can see stuff in Dublin here, we can see it all over the place. The one downside of doing the apply as column for this whole field here, for all the destination GeoIP info, is that I can't sort by country. It's all going to be just comma separated here. So that's where sometimes I do like to pull out the country. So let's say Ireland here. I can apply this one as a column and scroll all the way to the side. Where's my country? Source country here, and now I can sort by this and just see all the traffic by country. These columns are really driving me crazy. Okay, so I can see Republic of Korea, I can see Lithuania, so-and-so, and I can say, well, we don't do business here. This is kind of suspicious. So I can sort and kind of see the traffic based off of country as well. So many different use cases and ways that you might want to do this. what I'm going to do now is, because we're running short on time, is I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do the same thing here. So I'll be around. Let me know if you have questions in Slack, but around 12:50 Pacific time, I want to start moving into the next piece. And then, Phil, I cannot remember the life of me. Are we doing 3 or 4 hours today? I don't remember what's scheduled. If you could just let me know, either go off mute or let me know in Slack. I just can't remember what's scheduled for this thing, so I know if I've got 10 minutes left or an hour and 10 minutes left. All right. How are we doing? Can I get some thumbs up on Slack if we have completed that lab? Got one. Got a sad face. What's that one for? Having issues. Do you want to use screenshots, or can you let me know a little bit more about what the issues are with the GUIP files? While I wait for that, I've got a couple of thumbs up here, so I'm going to continue. And then Dusty, we can always, at the next lab break, we could take a look at that and see what the problem is. If it's occasionally with Windows, we do have some issues. I've had a couple of those when I taught this class in person, where we did everything identical to other students. And for some reason, they couldn't get the GUIP info to show up. And I haven't been able to isolate why. It's rare, but sometimes that happens. But if it's something else that you're having trouble with, like extracting them or anything else like that, let me know. And on the next break here, we'll take a look at that for you. Okay, so looking at some other tools here. We should be able to see my screen. We can hear me. Hopefully everything's good. If not, let me know in Slack. So a couple other tools. Wireshark's not the only thing. I did really want to focus on one tool and just deep dive into it. And this workshop traditionally is an 8-hour workshop where it's all hands-on. We go through all the labs, obviously skim down for our 4 hours that we have here together. And so, but there are plenty of other things. This isn't the only option. You might say, well, I need something that's command line based for Windows. Well, there's other tools out there. There's T-Shark. That's a command line. It's almost equivalent to TCP dump, but for Windows. So that way you could mass deploy it through group policy, or you could script it to run. You think there's some type of infection, you want to capture traffic on all your endpoints, and you don't want to do network taps, and everyone's working from home, and you get permission, obviously, because they're working from home, but you deploy T-Shark, run it for 10 minutes on everyone's machine, spit the file out, and you can ship that off through your EDR, or whatever the use case is. There's many other tools to use. I just want to show you how to do a lot of this with Wireshark. TCP dump comes in handy, and I use this a lot when using a Linux or Unix system, because Wireshark, it can crash. It's graphical interface. It's got some limitations. It's also, when there's a lot of traffic, can get a little buggy capturing as fast as you need to go. So TCP dump is like a lightweight, stripped down powerhouse for capturing packets. In my opinion, it's horrible looking at packets because you're looking at a command line, but it's able to capture things very efficiently. I use it also TCP dump very frequently when I'm doing pen tests or using new tools, because I want to understand my tools. I want to know if I use Nmap, what exactly happens? If I use a self scan, what's going on? What exactly is going on with my tool? What traffic's being sent to and from? Why is it responding this way? If it says a port's closed, why? Is that because it didn't respond? Is it because I got a closed an ACK packet or reset packet? What exactly is happening? So using a tool, whether it's Wireshark or TCP dump or anything, lets me get really intimate with my tools and understand my tools and even software better. I can't tell you how many times we've used like emulators, or we've done software reviews for clients where they say, hey, we want to see if the software is secure. Can you test it? And maybe it's Zoom, maybe it's something else. And then they say, wait a second, it says it's encrypted, but it's not. Almost every time I run a tool like Wireshark or TCP dump in a client environment, I find something really bad. Sometimes they're using, let's say, OpenVPN, and they're not doing it with encrypted LDAP. And therefore, every time a user authenticates or changes their password, we see that in clear text across the entire network. Or it might be that they're using a tool. I've got a talk coming up for OWASP. They're doing a 24-hour event, I think on June 6th. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. And I gave a lightweight version at B-Sides Las Vegas a couple years ago that I was doing a simple pen test. And at the very end, I ran Wireshark and TCP dump for 10 minutes. And I found out that this CPA firm had been using software that is run by Intuit. It's one of the big tax softwares that if you have a CPA doing your taxes, there's a good chance they're using it. And every time a CPA authenticated to the server, it basically sent the entire customer list including all their social security numbers, their first name, last name, home address, spouse name, email addresses, tax years, everything that you'd want for identity theft was being transferred over the network. And that included customers they hadn't worked with in many years because it was just the database of customers. So every time the CPA authenticated to the server, that was happening in plain text. Then anytime they did an update, it transferred the entire individual user, their customers' tax returns. So they update gross income, and all of a sudden, every expense, social security number, all kinds of stuff for that customer will go back and forth in clear text over the network. So you can find a lot of stuff using these tools, even places you didn't think you'd find stuff. Another thing, once I have a PCAP, right, whether I'm doing a threat hunt, I can't even talk anymore, a hunt, or I am doing incident response or whatever the use case is, it's a lot of packets. And so I use tools, other tools outside of Wireshark and other ways of enriching my data to help me come to a conclusion quicker, right? Because we charge clients by the hour, and I don't want to sit there and spend 5 hours doing a task. I need to find efficient ways of looking for evil and getting the clients the best results without wasting their money. So I use things like Bro, Zeek, CloudShark, some of these other tools that help you identify things. And I don't think they're a replacement for manual processing and looking at the raw packets and TCP dump or Wireshark, but they can help you get to your answer a lot quicker. One of those tools is CloudShark. 30-day free trial. After that, you have to pay for it. But you can upload your PCAP files, and they will look at things like malicious traffic, weird DNS. They'll run it against emerging rule threats. It's a cloud-based tool that will basically do a lot of this stuff for you and give you places that you should start digging in within Wireshark. I do want to warn you, I don't know what their policy is about once you upload a file whose property it is, but you do want to be careful if you are putting your network traffic up on the internet, any site or any tool that's cloud-based. You've got to look at the terms of service. You've got to look at the details to make sure you're not causing a breach. Another tool that's free forever is Packet Total, similar to CloudShark, where you upload your PCAP and it'll look for things like, here's an example. I uploaded the PCAP we're working on, and it says, look, here's a known Tor exit relay. That's something that you would not have known if you just look at an IP address or you did a GeoIP lookup. It's actually identifying that says, hey, this is known activity with Tor, or there's a problem with the SSL cert. So it does a bunch of other stuff, and it runs it through emerging threats rule sets for you. It'll also look at the GeoIP info. It builds this out for you. It also gives you tabs like DNS, HTTP, so you don't have to write these filters. So a lot of cool stuff. But going back, wrong way, back to the slide, anything you upload becomes public knowledge. So let's say you thought, well, this computer, my end user downloaded some malware. I want to upload it and look at this at Packet Total. Understandable, but what if there's other broadcast traffic that might have been a domain login that was in clear text, or some information about your internal IP addresses? This stuff now becomes public knowledge. This is same thing with like VirusTotal. Things that you upload, you need to be very careful about what you do upload, because that all the other researchers out there and even the bad guys can possibly look at that stuff. So just be careful. Great tools, but I would use this if, let's say, you were running a suspicious file. A user got a zip file, you put it in a lab environment, you start Wireshark or TCP dump, you capture the network traffic, you open the file, you interact with the file, you save the PCAP, and you upload it to Packet Total. Totally understandable. It's an isolated lab environment that's controlled, and it doesn't have proprietary information about your network in there. What I would not do is you have network traffic north-south of your corporate network, your production network, HR network, and you upload that. That's an absolute no-no. So other tools out there, Network Miner, you can download that for free. They give you some other things like it categorizes messages, images, it tries to extract stuff. So just other tools that give you tidbits of information that, Wireshark doesn't, or it might be harder to find. Something else I want to mention. So a couple of these lab files came from malwaretrafficanalysis.net. Brad runs this. He's a Palo Alto threat hunter, super, super smart guy. And I wanted to use a couple of those lab files because they're great. And also I wanted to show you that you've got over 1,300 malware samples that he has done in his lab environment. He posts there for free for you to go out there and practice. So after this course is done, you want to learn more, practice this more, hone in your skills, go there and you can just start sorting through those. And he even has some walkthroughs on occasionally, or you could take a look at how he found the information he found, the IOCs he found, Great, great, great resource for more stuff. Few other places out there. Security Onion, they've got some sample PCAPs. Wireshark, they've got some sample PCAPs as well. And I bring this up because they give you some good baselines as well as some other isolated PCAPs that you can play with that you don't need to set up your own labs to isolate traffic. You can get started tomorrow. When you extract some of the files, I encourage you to look into malware analysis, some workshops. There's some stuff on Pluralsight. Myself, I teach a 8-hour malware analysis course. It's a little challenging to do remotely because it's you need a Windows VM that's about 30 gigs with all my tools on it. So that one's a little challenging. I don't know if we'll do that virtually, but maybe I'll put some stuff up on YouTube for that. But you can then take those files you extracted outside of your PCAP and then start doing things like upload it to VirusTotal if you're sure it's not proprietary information. You could put it in a sandbox. You could use hybrid analysis. You could have your own cuckoo sandbox, different ways that you can then take the data you get from your PCAP and now turn it into more valuable information or take that next step in analyzing what's going on. Okay, so you can also run it through Snort or Bro or Zeek. These tools are meant to kind of be in line. So it's sniffing traffic and it's generating these alerts, but both Snort and Bro/Zeek, you can use these as kind of to replay these PCAP files and you can run them against them to look for emerging threats. You can generate files, all kinds of stuff. So you can absolutely use a Snort instance or a Zeek instance and gather more intel based off of that. Okay, so, and normally in the 8-hour class, we dive into that a little further. We just don't have time here. So now I want to tell you a little bit about traffic filters. And we've touched on these. You saw me do a couple of these, but the traffic or the display filters, these are absolutely different than the capture filters. The capture filter is a reminder. We're defining what we do or do not want to capture when we start sniffing. A display filter will take all that data in the PCAP and it will then start narrowing it down smaller, smaller, and smaller into what you're looking for. And you can adjust the display filter without losing data. So in the bottom there in that grid, I do want to mention there, on the left side, you've got the capture filter of how you would find traffic to or from an IP address of 10.1.1.1. So you would type out host 10.1.1.1. If you're using a display filter, it's going to be ip.addr equal 10.1.1.1. If you wanted to see TCP traffic that was DNS, you could type TC as the capture filter. You could type TCP port 53. As a display filter, it's TCP.port equal 53. Okay, so there's different ways of doing equal signs or operators with the display filters, but I just want to compare that both are doing essentially the same thing. It's going to narrow down what you're seeing, but one's before you capture and the other one's after you capture, and they're different syntaxes. And so that will trip you up. It trips me up from time to time. Google is a great resource. Wireshark documents this well, and you can look at what filters you're interested in. We already talked about capture filters. I've already talked about this display filters and the red versus green. There is a way, I don't find it terribly useful. I find Google better, but there is another way that you can build out your display filters. Up at the top in the display filter, you can click on the expression button, and that lets you build kind of click here, there, and you can build your expressions. I just find it a little bit challenging to find what I want. Like if I want SYN packets, I don't know what that's called. Is the field name called TCP flags, ACK flags? I don't really know. So you can start digging these out, but see, it's called TCP.flags, and I might not have known that. So it does take a bit of time to build these out this way, but then you can click on that and then say, well, do you want it to be equal, less than, greater than equals to, in, not equals to. So you kind of pick your operators, and then do you want it to equal 1 or 0? But still, does 1 or 0, which one do you want? Do you know which is on or off, or do you know the possibilities? It's an okay option, but there is a better way. So what I find to be better is that if you can find something you're interested in your packets, you can dive into the details pane, right click on it, and remember how we did apply as column? Well, right below that, there's apply as filter. And even better than that, you could do prepare as filter, and that helps prepare the display filter, and then you can modify it. So maybe you see source IP address equals 18.236.57.250. You do want the source IP address, but you want it to be 8.8.8.8. You don't want it to be exactly that. Well, if you click on apply as filter, it's going to immediately search for that IP address. So the source IP of 18.236.57.250. If you prefer just to have it prepare the filter, but not execute it, so that way you can modify it to equal 8.8.8.8, click on prepare as a filter, and that gives you more flexibility. Okay, and I'll demo that in a second here. So some of the things you can do, just as examples, you can filter, just look for ICMP traffic. You could do source destination IP. You could do all an IP address that's going to or from a source or destination. You could search for specific services. You can filter out noise by doing, like, let's exclude ARP, ICMP, and DNS. You can search for ASCII text. It's not great. If you do want to search for keywords like password or user, which is super fun, I recommend other tools like ngrep or grep and start filtering out stuff like that. It's a little better way to filter out stuff. Using a text string within Wireshark, it's not what it's meant for, and it's a little clunky. So let's take a look at some of the Wireshark statistics, right? And I'm actually going to switch back over to Wireshark, give you a quick demo of this rather than PowerPoint by death or death by PowerPoint. Okay, let me switch over. You now should be seeing my Wireshark window. I am going to click on the statistics menu. And so we have a few different things here. When I click on statistics, I can look at the capture file properties. And this just gives me overall information about how many packets, the size, who captured it, when it was captured, the first packet, destination. So it really just gives you kind of an overview of what you're looking at. You may need that for a court. The other things we can take a look at here within statistics, one of my favorites, and I encourage you to do in the labs here, is protocol hierarchy. When I click on protocol hierarchy, this gives me an overview of what's going on in this PCAP. And that may give me an idea of which profile to look at. I can see here that we're using IPv4. I can see that there is a lot of traffic that's TCP related. Within that, I could see that a majority of this is HTTP, so I may want to switch over to my HTTP profile. I could see that there's a lot of media that's going back and forth. And so you can even apply this as a filter, prepare as a filter. And this is what I mean. If I right-click on this and I apply as filter, or sorry, prepare as filter, selected, what's going to happen here in the background, it's going to then pop this HTTP up here. But let's say I'm over here, I'm looking at the, excuse me, the source IP address. I want source IP address. I don't know how to type the filter out. I want to use this, but I want to change the IP address. If I click on apply, it's just going to immediately search for that. But if I click on prepare, it's going to build this out, and now I can adjust this without executing it. So now I can change it to 8.8.8.8, and now I can then search for that. Okay, some other statistics that we can take a look at. I can look at conversations. So this can show me things like on Ethernet level or IP or even TCP, who are the top talkers. I can sort by, let's say, bytes. So I could see, well, let me look at the top bytes here. So it looks like this transaction here had the most bytes. Is that interesting? Let me look at IPv4. Let me see who IP-wise is sending the most bytes. Okay, so it tells me this, 50.63, this is maybe something I want to look at. It's talking to this endpoint. Maybe it's a server and it makes sense to you. It depends on your environment. So you can start digging in statistically on stuff. The only time I really use here the IO graph, this is sometimes interesting, is that it can sometimes show beaconing. So if you have a network and there's nothing going on in the middle of the night, but then all of a sudden you see traffic spiking and it's looking pretty consistently, you might be able to see heartbeats or command and control, stuff like that through some of these IO graphs here as well. Okay, I'll let you kind of play with those. I'm going to keep moving forward here in my notes. I just want to see if there's anything else I wanted to touch on. Okay, so let me switch back over to the slides now that I showed you some of those statistics. Okay, and so here, the thing I want to talk about is just some baseline traffic. And this is where we're going to get heavy into the labs for the last 45 minutes or so. Is that you need to have a baseline. You cannot just take everything that you learned, go out there into a large network and just find stuff like you're going to see in the lab here. You really need to have a baseline. Back to my friend Sun Tzu, Art of War. If you know the enemy, know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you also suffer defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you'll succumb in every battle. And this is important, as I mentioned, in cybersecurity, but even more so specifically in network traffic. You need to have a good architecture. You need to be able to identify normal before you can identify evil, right? This is a challenge right now. Traditionally, we would see, and I'm just going to give this analogy. If I go into an environment and I'm doing any type of incident response or threat hunting, if I see RDP, that's something I consider is not very good. And you might say, well, my administrators need to use RDP. Okay, but that should come from an administrator VLAN and then be going out to servers or end users. That should be a certain flow in your architecture. I should not be seeing an endpoint, an end user's laptop RDP to another end user's laptop. That's evil. But if you allow that to happen, that's normal in your environment, it's difficult to detect evil RDP traffic. If you allow SMB from one endpoint to another and shares all over your network, it's tough to identify spread of ransomware, right? If you look at WannaCry, it travels over SMB. If you have specific flows, you have a server VLAN and endpoints traverse that. It goes from an endpoint VLAN, uses SMB into the server VLAN. That's normal to see that type of flow. And anytime I see SMB from endpoint to endpoint within the same VLAN, that is evil, and I investigate that. Okay, so there's many different baselines. There's things that are going to help you knowing TTLs of different operating systems, and that way you can identify abnormal behaviors. Knowing things, for example, just by protocol. So your network, systems, and even protocols, and then you're going to be able to identify those evil. And I do this because I'm going to show you here later on a screenshot, and it's going to show some abnormal behavior. But unless I show you this slide first that shows a typical ICMP protocol, you're not going to be able to identify that unless you've seen that before. So it's important to identify normal before you look at that evil. So here is, for example, ICMP traffic. It's just I'm pinging. So I ping delivery-ups.com. This used to be one of my phishing domains that I had. I disabled or I turned off the server. And so we can see that I did a ICMP echo request. I pinged, and there was no responses. So if we look at the bottom there in Wireshark, this is what happens is there's a DNS query. Maybe you didn't know that was going to happen. So now you know, oh, when I ping, I should also see DNS. Below that in purple, we now see 4 requests and there's no replies back. Each of them are 47 bytes in length because it's the same, hello, are you there? Hello, are you there? Hello, are you there? Hello, are you there? The TTL we see is 128. So we could identify what type of operating system that is. There's keys here that we can identify. And we've identified there that I just did a ping and it's 4 ICMP echo requests. If you've ever used Linux or Unix or Mac, you know that it's going to keep going until you stop it. So we can also say, well, we know there that that's normal. Now let's turn the server on, ping a different website, so corporateblue.com. In this case, it was on, so I pinged, I got a reply. Pinged, got a reply. Pinged, got a reply. Pinged, got a reply. So now in purple down there, after the DNS query, we see a request, then a reply. Request, reply, request, reply 4 times. And we see the TTL of the request is 128. The reply is 46. We see the length of the packets are 74 bytes long, both for the request and the reply. That's what normal good ping looks like back and forth. We won't have time to get into this in the 4-hour workshop, but I do provide a common traffic directory for you, both in your downloads as well as the Kali machine. I encourage you to open these up and look at it. Take a look at the FTP, the telnet traffic, and you'll be able to see clear text traffic going back and forth. Understand what some of this traffic looks like, and there's a lot more you can download from Wireshark's website, but you absolutely want to take a look at this and see what normal traffic looks like. And even if you didn't do this and now you start looking at evil traffic, you may want to go back to this and say, okay, well, I need to baseline myself first and see what this normal traffic looks like, and then I can compare that. Okay, and then, so some IOCs, some things you might look at now that you know what normal traffic looks like. I'm going to kind of skip past some of this stuff, but there's certain domains you may want to hunt for, like .tk. Honestly, I've never done any type of cybersecurity where I have seen a .tk and it's been a legitimate use, right? So you can filter for things like top level domains with a .tk, a .ru for Russia, a .cn for China. Again, depends on your environment and what your users are doing, but there's certain domain names, the top level domains, I can filter that, and almost 99% of the time it's, well, we got to investigate this. There's a .tk domain that our users are browsing to. Okay, so specific protocols you may want to take a look at if you're not sure where to look at. Clear text protocols, DNS, everything starts with DNS. So I always look at that, filter out, are there any .rus, CNs, TKs, those top level domains. Clear text protocols, there's different things that you start identifying as just malicious, and you can look there. You can also look for specific protocols that are associated with different malware. If that's what you're looking for, it's up to your use case. Okay, different, and this is how you can do some of that stuff. So for example, like, yeah, I want to look for any DNS queries that have a .cn. Okay, well, DNS.qry.name =, and then you could do a wildcard for .cn, .tk, whatever you're interested in, right? So these are just some different examples here of things that I look for. Bottom right corner, you can look for TCP port 3389. So I'm looking for RDP. Nowadays with work from home, that's super challenging because everyone's doing it everywhere. It's a mess. Okay, and then here's some ways. I'm not going to detail with this. You can practice this, but you finally identified some evil in your network, but you say, I don't know. Everyone's working from home. I don't know what this IP is. I don't know what the system is. How could I identify who this is? Well, here's a couple of different tips that you could do. You can use DHCP, BootP, NBNS. For Mac systems, you can search for IP contains MacBook. You can look at Kerberos and you can find names in there. So a couple different ways that you can identify the host name of the system that you're trying to find rather than just look at the IP address. Different user agent strings. Obviously, these can be spoofed, but this is interesting to look at because, as I mentioned before, all pen testing tools, they've got their own user agent string. And if you have a good baseline of what's allowed in your environment, you could easily find outliers. Okay, even mobile phones. I won't go into a ton of detail here in a second on the mobile phones, but in the user agent strings, you can also find operating systems. So if you see Windows NT, after the NT, you can find out what version of Windows it has. So I have a little map here for you. 5.1 is XP. So maybe you don't think you have any XP or 2003 boxes still in your environment. Well, if you look at the user agent string and you filter by that, or you search for this, you can now identify old, outdated systems within your environment. Maybe your patch management needs to be looked at. Mobile phone, same thing. Within the user agent string, we can see what type of device. I know these are outdated with a Galaxy S3, but we can not just identify the type of device, but possibly even the carrier they're using as well, just from the user agent string. Okay, so we've got a scenario. This is how the last 40-ish minutes of the workshop is going to work, and you can continue on your own after that. But we are going to start with the scenario. I tried to give you a backstory on it, and then I'll give you some questions and things you want to identify. So in this scenario, and I'm going to walk through these with you, the first few. The first scenario, a network admin Betty interrupts you as you're reading Peter Kim's Hacker Playbook 3. Just when you're getting to the new pen testing lab setup. Yes, Betty, you ask, with an annoying tone. I was working with Palo Alto support this weekend on updating our firewall rule and noticed something unusual in PCAPs. Can you take a look? Unfortunately, Betty's laptop had a blue screen of death when she got back to her desk, and the PCAP was corrupt. However, she did have a screenshot saved. You put down the Hacker Playbook 3 and you look at the screenshot of her PCAP. So these are the things as you go through this in the labs as well as your workplace. When you take these skills out, these are the things I like to look at and think in the back of my mind, or even have this as a cheat sheet when I'm investigating through network PCAPs. You want to think of an executive summary. You want to have a timeline. You do an Excel sheet, bullet points, whatever works for you. We want to have a timeline of the activity start to finish. Who was involved? What systems were involved? A summary of what happened. Was it malware? Was it intentional, unintentional, etc.? Details. This is more technical. Date, time of activities using UTC. The MAC address, IP address, the host name of infected systems or impacted system. Exactly what happened. And then IOCs. You want to be able to take this. Again, if these got to your endpoints, take this information and make your organization better. Build a defensible fort in your organization. Take the IP addresses, the port numbers, the domains, build out better detection tools based off the investigation that you have. So this is where you give some feedback. I want you to take a look at this slide here, and I want you to take a look at the screenshot of Wireshark and tell me what is, now that you don't know what normal looks like, what is abnormal? There's quite a few things here, but start posting them in Slack if you would. Tell me what you see that is abnormal in this PCAP now that you know the baseline. Okay, I see duplicate replies, right? So it's out of order. It's not request, reply, request, reply, request, reply. There's duplicates. The length is all over the place, right? So we see 704, 82, 302, 82. Then there's multiple requests. So it doesn't seem like they match up. And as we saw in our baseline, there was 74 bytes every time I did a ping from a Windows system. And there was only 4 of them. Anything else that we see? The key ones always takes everyone a little bit of time to look at. And it's the area that I say I don't really look at. 2 IP addresses as the source. Okay, so yeah, there's different, so possibly, I mean, there could be that there's just multiple pings happening in the environment, but we've identified 2 different IP addresses. There's something else. It's going to smack you in the face when you see it. Again, it's the place that I say I normally just ignore, but in this case, it's actually valuable. Okay, see one more typing, I'm going to a second. Okay, TTL, I said that's high, that's absolutely correct, but we might have to baseline what operating system it is. So a couple people are typing. The thing I wanted to point out here, I'm going to go ahead and say it, is that, yes, finally someone got it. Okay, so in the bottom, the bytes pane. Okay, so if we look all the way at the bottom there, at the bytes pane where I said I normally don't really look at, I minimize that. This is ICMP. The protocol column says ICMP. Again, that's what Wireshark thinks it is. And that's what it's dissected it as. But if you look at the very bottom there, just next to the hexadecimal, we see get/http 1.1 host dhavalkpil.com connect. Okay, so what that is that is HTTP traffic, but Wireshark said it's ICMP traffic. Weird. So what's happening is that they're tunneling. They're trying to use ICMP. They're encapsulating the HTTP traffic within ICMP traffic. How do we find that? Because we started identifying abnormal things. We know what normal looks like now with ICMP. Now we can find evil within that, okay? So we saw some things that were not necessarily evil. TTL of 255, that's not evil, but that is different, okay? Multiple replies and the multiple requests, that's not evil, but that's different. The length of the ICMP packet, that's not necessarily evil, but that's abnormal. And so we start putting all these pieces of the puzzle together. And then finally we see at the bottom there that there's an HTTP GET request, which is going to a malicious URL. That's obviously evil. But there's different indicators that we're looking at with some of the skills we learned today, putting it all together, and that gives us a bigger picture. Okay, so now another lab here. As you're walking, the scenario is as you're walking to a break room to get more cold brew coffee, you bump into George, who says he's been meaning to call you all day about a possible incident, but he's been swamped with TPS reports. After his lunch break, he noticed that a sensitive document was opened in a notepad, and he's sure it wasn't looking at that document before he left. There was also a black window in the background saying something about North Carolina. Can you look into this, George asks. Okay, so this is the netcat-exfil pcat file. And so we're looking for some of that same information, a timeline, who was involved, details, IOCs, that kind of stuff for our report. I want to first give you the kind of what happened here for those of you who are newer to this stuff. So this is and I don't really want to call it attack because it's very simple, but the point is to be simple. What happened is in the bottom right corner of the attacker's PC, I spun up a AWS Lightsail instance. So I went to Amazon Web Services, I spun up a server, a Ubuntu server. I then told it to listen on port 80. I then went over to the victim's machine, a Windows box. I had a file called test.txt, which contains sensitive data. I then opened up a command prompt and I typed in nc.exe. I had netcat there. It's a tool that's a network Swiss Army knife. And I then connected to the IP address of my attacker's machine, which is 52.33.20.94 on port 80. So my attacker's machine was sitting there waiting for connections on port 80. Finally, the Windows machine connects on port 80. When it connects, it sends all the data from test.txt into that socket, which was on port 80. So it basically took that file, pushed it through to the public IP address of my attacker machine on port 80. Bottom right corner there, we can see that the output file then it received is that file called this is a text file with sensitive data. So it was able to receive that. I exfiltrated a text file over port 80. Now, if we switch over to the Wireshark view, the network traffic view, what happens is that we see there, it starts off, there's a packet, and it's sending, it basically connects on port 80 with a SYN. It's got some other stuff there. And then there's a couple different packets back and forth, but we can see that it was using port 80, and Wireshark is going to think that that is TCP or HTTP traffic. It doesn't realize that that is not, it doesn't follow the uniform for HTTP traffic. The one thing I do want to show you though, and so I'm going to switch back over here to the lab. Let me share this. Okay, and so I'm going to now open up this file. I'm going to go back over to my labs, and I'm going to look for netcat exfil. And I made this very, I slimmed this down. So I just gave you what you needed for this as we're getting started with our labs. I can look at each packet one by one by clicking on them and then going to the bytes pane and looking at it here, you know, trying to distinguish this. If I go down here, I can finally see this is a text file, but I have to go packet by packet looking here in the hex or ASCII window down at the bottom. There's an easier way. I'm going to minimize that again as I told you to do. I'm going to click on this, and we can see that this is one stream of TCP data. And so what I'm going to do is going to right click and then follow TCP stream. When I do that, it combines, it basically takes all the relevant information of the stream and it puts us on the screen here. The other useful thing that I can do with this, it's kind of a cheat, but you can go on the bottom right here if we had more than one stream where it says 0. And you could just press up arrow, up arrow, up arrow from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many streams you have. And you're basically getting the full conversation from client to server, the whole conversation that happened from that whole entire stream. So when you look at some of the other stuff that's like a bunch of HTTP traffic, if we go back to one of our malicious traffic samples, we can just kind of, it's cheating, and I wouldn't recommend it for this lab, but later on in a real world, oh yeah, just click on stream up arrow, and you're going through the different streams and you're just seeing all the conversations put together so you don't have to look packet by packet. Super useful. Okay, and so now there's another scenario here. And I'm going to keep the lab open. I'm going to read it off, and then I'll switch back to the slides in a second here. So the scenario is that Sally calls the security team on Monday morning to report a possible incident. She said that she locked her computer Friday before leaving the office. When she got into the office Monday morning, her computer was unlocked, and there was a screen with writing about cats again. Okay, so what we want to take a look at here, and then I'll go back and show you how this actually happened, is, let me see which file I'm looking at. Okay, so I'm going to go back to File, Open, and go back to my labs. And then this one is Netcat Reverse Shell is the one we're going to look at. And we can see now there's 51 packets. So as we progress, I give you more to look at. It's not going to be as easy. Okay, and so the thing here that we're looking at is we can see, you know, very quickly in my hunting here is that I'm seeing, okay, there's port 80, you know, there's a lot of web traffic. So I might want to switch my profiles here to IR HTTP traffic. I'm now looking at this. I don't see a host name. So that tells me, you know, why am I not seeing a host name here? If this is HTTP traffic, that's a little bit unusual. If I look into the details pane, there's no HTTP dissector, so it wasn't able to properly dissect that. So that's unusual. So maybe I go here and I say, well, let's look at the stream. I'm going to right click, follow TCP stream. This is interesting. Microsoft Windows version 6.3, blah, blah, blah. There's a command prompt here. It says, who am I? Anytime you see who am I, we should all be detecting this. If I've got a user and they're opening a command prompt and they're asking the questions after they've logged in, who am I? We might want to check them and possibly see if they've been drinking too much or if they're the right person for the right seat on our bus. Okay, so I shouldn't be seeing who am I on any of my machines. This is not legitimate use, right? And there may be one instance, out there that's legit, but this is the first thing I do when I compromise a system on a pen test. I want to know, who am I? Am I the root? Am I an Apache user? Who am I? So I type, who am I? right? So that's obviously malicious. If I was actually at the user prompt, I could see who I am. I've logged in, I know who I am. So this is malicious right there. Okay, so who am I? It says corporate blue, net user, and I'm looking at some of the stuff. All this activity is no bueno. Directory, someone's looking at the directory there, and we can see the reason this is blue versus red. I'll go back to the top. Red is the client, blue is the server. So there's one system and the other. So you could see one system's providing command prompt, then the other system is typing who am I, then the other system is responding with the answer. Then it provides another prompt. Then the other system then says net user. Then that system responds back with an answer here. Okay, this is the account. There's an administrator, corporate blue account. There's the answer, provides a prompt again. Then the other system says, or user does dir, and then it gives an answer. So it's a conversation back and forth. That's why you're seeing the different colors there. There's a question in the chat here. So would that combination do anything to a hazardous or malicious stream? I don't fully understand the question, Eric, but I think you're saying if there's something like a malicious file and we did follow TCP stream, are you saying could that infect our system? Is that the question? Correct. No, we're just looking at the raw data back and forth. The part that's dangerous is if I go here, I click on file and I do export objects, HTTP. If I grabbed one of these, there's nothing here. But if I click this and I press save or save all, this is extracting it to my local machine. Right now, whatever I do in Wireshark, it's still in Wireshark. The moment I press save, it tells me, well, where do you want to save it to? I think my VM's just kind of having a hard time. Here we go. So where do you want to save it to? I put it on my desktop. But the moment I press save here to my desktop, that's where it opens the malicious object on my desktop. So that's where it gets bad. Okay. So we saw some funky stuff there. Even though it's port 80, it doesn't look like HTTP traffic at all. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is switch back over, give you the view of my slides, if I can find them. There it is. Okay, so this is what happened. You've got the victim's machine. You should be seeing my PowerPoint with two command prompts. The top there is command prompt in Windows. So the victim typed out ncat.exe, the IP address of the attacker's machine on port 80, and then the -E says basically pass through when you connect, rather than a file, cmd.exe. So basically execute cmd.exe, and then on the attacker machine at the bottom there, we're listening on port 80. So I do netcat listen on port 80. And then the moment that the victim machine connects on that socket, what happens is that we have full command prompt access to that machine. So this is what happened. You can see I'm on a Lightsail instance. I'm in Amazon. I'm in the Oregon region. I'm the attacker. I now have full control of the victim's machine. I type who am I, then I type net user, then I type dir. These are enumeration techniques that I'm using to find out what machine did I compromise, because I might have sent this executable or this malware to 1,000 people. I don't know where I'm at or who I've compromised. It's basically phishing. You know, it came back. What did I catch? I don't know yet. So I'm trying to figure that out here. Okay, so now we've got another one, and this is one where I'm going to give you a little bit of time to play with. It's called Patch Tuesday. And this is the scenario is that your system administrator reports a potential incident after performing a remote update on an EC2 instance in Amazon. Take a look at the sniff traffic to determine if there's a reason to dig deeper. I want you to go in and answer some of these questions. Timeline, who was involved, what IP addresses were involved, MAC addresses. You know, we've only got a couple of minutes, so I don't expect you to give me a full report here in the next 5 or 10 minutes, but I do want to give you, I'll call it 5 minutes till 1:40 Pacific time to dig into this PCAP file and tell me what you see. Is there normal? Is there evil? What are you identifying here? And so what I want, the file's called HTTP Empire. I'm going to show you which one that is. I'll switch back over. Okay, so I'm going to open up. I'm going to go to my lab files, and then what are we calling this one? I think it's in the, I didn't name these properly, I guess. Patch Tuesday, there it is. So it's Patch Tuesday directory, and then hta-emp pcap.ng. So open this one up. and you've got 3,000 packets. I told you it was going to get a little harder each time. I want you to go through that and tell me what you see. Use statistics. Tell me what protocols you're seeing. Tell me what traffic you're seeing. Tell me what IP addresses. Are they in the US? Are they outside the US? Start digging into some of the stuff and post it in Slack if you would. Some of the answers and what you see as you find it, please. You don't have to have the answer right away as you go through. You just point out observations. That's all it is this time. What stands out on the basically makes you feel a little weird, that the hair on the back of your neck sticks up, any of that kind of stuff. Okay, someone says Dublin. Cloudflare. Okay, RDP makes someone feel a little uneasy. Absolutely. Is it actual RDP? Is it just the port 3389? Have you dug into that? Right, all good things so far. I guess you're depending on your perspective. I like finding stuff, but this might not be good for this organization. Right, and there's a lot of depends. So if this is an organization where there's 5 employees in a real estate business here in Los Angeles, and you see things from Dublin, that might make you stand up. I know there's certain, I think Office 365, they do a lot of stuff out of Ireland. So, that might be normal, might not. Do they use Office 365? Are they using G Suite? There's a lot of, it depends. I get that. Give me another 2 minutes, see if there's anything else anyone identifies. And then for the bonus questions, does anyone know exactly what happened or what was used? Maybe our coffee breaks weren't long enough to get some good coffee. Okay, I'm going to continue. I can't tell if everyone's asleep or on phone calls or what it is without with being virtual here. So I'm going to go and walk through a little bit, and I'll show you some screenshots of kind of what happened here as well. So we can still see the this my VM here. And so, I mean, the first thing, I just come into here and I see, okay, 3389, someone mentioned that, RDP, that concerns me a little bit. It looks like Wireshark doesn't have a protocol dissector for RDP, or possibly it's not RDP. We don't really know yet. If you go into statistics and we look at protocol hierarchy, we can see here that IPv4 is most of the traffic, TCP is most of that. There's quite a bit, it looks like, of SSL TLS traffic. I'll probably want to look into that. There's some HTTP traffic. It's very small, and I might just want to look at that as kind of an outlier And I can see there's some media, some tech stuff that happened, some data in here. But really, it looks like SSL traffic is a big one. This might be the RDP traffic. It just might not be able to understand that. But that gave me some insight. Someone says TLS, but there was actually no handshake involved with that. Okay, that's good. There's one here that I do want to show you. And this isn't going to kill your system, but it's not something I'd recommend. And then someone says here, what's the question? Why are you showing more than me? I'm wondering if you have a display filter on. Check that. See if your display filter is on, because if you do have a display filter, it may be limiting that. Also, hoping we're in the same file too. Nope, the same, they said. Let's look at that. CP. I'm not exactly sure. We can take a look at that a little bit later, I think. I need probably a little more information on that. But let me keep going with this. So the other thing, did anyone look at any files that were possibly transferred? Extracting objects? If you went into File, Export Objects, and we try HTTP, I can look through here and I see OCSP request, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's fine. And then I see here Adobe update.hta. And then I also, something else that just shows that's a little bit interesting here is that right below that, I see an IP address with :8080, which is a little unusual to me. And I see a get, and then get.php, process.php, process.php, news.php, news.php. And a lot of these look like process, get, news. These are all the same bytes. That's a little bit interesting too, that it's going to these different pages, but they're identical pages. Why is your news, your process, and your get pages all identical here? So that's a little suspicious as well. So a couple things that were unusual there. This is the thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually save this object. So I'm going to take this Adobe update HTA. I'm going to save this. I'm going to put this here in my downloads. Let me put it on my desktop. Okay, so this is extracting out this HTA file. This is where it does get dangerous. I built this, it's pretty benign, but I still wouldn't, go clicking on it. Okay, so I'm gonna now, let me see where I'm at. Okay, I'm on my desktop here. I see my Adobe update.hta. So one thing I wanna do is, now that I've identified this, I know this is taking a step further than Wireshark, but I've got this here. So why don't I run strings against this Adobe file and just see what it is before I run it. Okay. So looking at this, I see it's HTML head cipher, PowerShell, NOP, SCA, W, and code. And so I see encode. Now I see this long string here, all the way down to the bottom here. And I'm just going to copy this. Okay. And then I see W script shell run. This does not make me feel very good either. And then I'm guessing that I'm going to pull up a web browser just so I'm not doing a bunch of command line stuff for everyone. I'm guessing this is base64 encoded. And so let me just Google something here. We could do this through the command line, but base64 decode. My VM is completely lagging here. Okay, so if we find something here and we search for this, I'm going to just paste in the base64 there and decode it. Okay, and so I see a bunch of stuff here. I might have to play with the character set here, but I can see all kinds of stuff through PowerShell. I see H key, local machine, so there's registry keys in here. I see a whole lot of stuff that doesn't make me feel good, and you could obviously dive into this a little bit deeper, but a lot of weird stuff there. PowerShell, base64 encoded. Again, going back to normal, are your developers, are your system admins base64 encoding their PowerShell scripts? So long story short, we found this. Let me see if there was something else here I wanted to show you. We go back here to Wireshark. Okay, did anyone else try and follow the streams here? If we follow TCP stream, we could see that there was a GET request from the system It's requesting that Adobe HTA file. We then again see that same thing that I saw using strings here, that the file was provided, and then the same base64 encoded string that we've got there. That doesn't look good. We then probably want to take a look at after this. So if I look at packet 2186, let's see what happens right after this packet. 2186, so around here. And then right after that, we see a bunch of 3389. There was a little bit before that, but let me keep going down here. You know, there's a bunch of other stuff going on. And if we look at the host through the HTTPS profile, we probably don't see any host name. So it probably didn't have a valid certificate there. Let's keep going. Anything else? Some other weird things. Here's some of that port 8080. So if I follow this stream, okay, so it looks like there was some requests and it's going to 8080. There's some cookie that's being involved here. But long story short, if you keep digging into this, I don't want to spend too much time. What's happening here, I've got a question. My AV program filtered the traffic. Guess it did what it was intended to. All right, yeah, so sometimes AV solutions will look into PCAPs. They're getting more advanced there. I do want to switch back over to actually show you the attacker side and what happened here. Let me go back to this one. Okay, so what happened here is that I used a tool called Empire. And so what Empire is, it's kind of like Metasploit. It creates payloads. And the cool thing about Empire, it recently just stopped getting supported, but I created a file here. So I set up an HTTP listener. So my attacker machine is going to listen on port 80 or 8080, and it's going to create a file called Adobe update.hta. I then generate that file. So it created this file. I then served that up on a website. So I created a fake website and said, hey, you need to download Adobe updates. You're vulnerable, blah, blah, blah. I then let that sit there. I went to my victim's Windows machine. I went to my fake Adobe update site. So maybe adobe-update.com. I downloaded that adobe-update.hta file, double-clicked on it, and immediately what it did is it creates a reverse shell back to my attacker box in Amazon using PowerShell. So rather than having a binary that's going to be sitting there on the endpoint, it does it through an HTA file extension type, and it is fileless because it's using PowerShell. So it's doing a reverse shell through PowerShell, so it's all in memory. So it's a lot of antivirus tools are not going to detect that. They're getting better at it. And they were definitely going to detect mine because I did nothing special to it. So then once it connects back, it has to then, it tries to be a little bit stealthy, and it's basically beaconing back on port 8080, and it's trying those different URLs so it doesn't stand out. So rather than just 8080 over and over, it tries news.php, process.php, blah, blah, blah.php, and it's trying to beacon back home and phone home using those different URLs on my attacker system. So I've got this listener sitting here listening, and basically you can see there that it's listening on port 8080. I eventually got that connection back, and at the bottom of the screen there, when you see agents, I got two different machines I was able to compromise. It's actually the same machine, 2 sessions, and I have full control with command line. So I can add users, I can do all kinds of stuff. I can look at files, I can export files, I can add files. I basically have control of this machine at this point. Okay, so we walked through that stuff. And this was base64. I decoded that text file that we saw, or the HTA file that was base64 encoded. And you can see it's just full PowerShell that's running. Okay, I'm going to skip over the CPA one. I just want to do one more that we take a look at here. Do I want to do this one? Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look here at, we're going to do a data breach lab. So I am going to switch over. I'll give you the scenario real quick. This will be our last lab. The CFO calls you into his office and tells you that some confidential data was leaked. Pretty sure that it's an insider and wants you to investigate to stay between the investigation to stay between the two of you. He asks for you to perform incident response to find out if data was accessed on a file share. Who it was accessed by, when it was accessed, what data was accessed to determine if the company needs to report the data breach to California, since there's a 500 record threshold. So what we're going to do is I'm going to switch back over to my VM. I'll give you a few minutes to look for some stuff, and then I'll walk you through it and we'll close out. Okay, so I'm going to go to File, Open. I am going to go to the lab files that we have, data breach directory, and then there's a lab-data-breach file. We're going to open that up. You've got only 100, sorry, I was filtering it there. Oh, you still have 166 packets, so it's pretty small. I want you to take a look at that. Take a look at protocol hierarchy. Tell me some of the stuff you see. Tell me if there was a file that was possibly leaked, if there's any sensitive information, what sensitive information you possibly see in this packet capture. Okay, it looks like some people are already figuring out the answer there. I'll give you a few more minutes. Okay, and we see if we look at protocol hierarchy, I'm just going to kind of give a little tidbit. SMB version 2, that's about 85%. So I may want to switch over to one of those profiles that I gave you. Okay, someone said I froze. Let me stop sharing and try again. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. But we're back. I've got the, we saw protocol hierarchy. The SMB was a lot of it. You know, you can use whatever protocol you want, but if you use the SMB profile, that may help you out a little bit. There we go. We're getting some answers. Okay, so we see that someone mentioned that there's an IPC share connection, and then credit cards.txt was taken, confidential tag, and then someone else had copy pasted the fake MasterCard and Visa records that were in there. So a couple different ways of doing that. One, if we just switch over to the SMB profile, I can sort by file name possibly. Okay, and just doing that, I see there's a serve desktop.ini, creditcards.txt. You know, there's a few things there. So that's one way to do it. Another way is if I go to File, Export Objects, SMB, I can see here that there was the creditcards.txt file. Another way we could have done it is I could have followed TCP stream. And this is where I was mentioning where there's quite a few of these. If I was on different streams here, I could just kind of click through them and browse this. Okay, nothing there. Let me look through stream 1. Okay, at the bottom of stream 1, I can see that there's the credit card numbers. Okay, so just a few different ways that you can get to the answers. There's also some filters. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you could easily do some filters to pull that information out as well. Let me see, we're on time. So I have just 5 minutes left. That we pretty much did that last lab. I didn't get through as many labs as I was hoping to do, but there's some great ones. The next one in here is ransomware. There's probably one of my favorite labs is there's a networking tool that is downloaded, but it's actually not the real networking tool. It was a Trojan. So you can play with some of these things and you can see some of the different behaviors over the network. I am going to pause here, at least for the workshop. I'm going to see if there's any final questions in the chat. If there's anything Phil wants to close with, I'm happy to do that. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know different time zones. And as I mentioned, you've got all the slides. So it walks you through the rest of them. You've got all the labs. You can continue working on these things. And some of the labs, I actually have a detailed walkthrough of what happened, how to find that. So you can play with that a little bit later. As I mentioned, please connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if there's any questions there, I'm always happy to answer these questions. And I love talking about this stuff, so we can, oops, I think I completely stopped sharing there, but happy to walk you through things even after the fact. I just love going over this stuff, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got feedback, I'd appreciate the feedback. Always trying to improve this workshop. There's a couple other ISSA chapters that I'm working with, and we're going to do this for. So if there were certain things like, hey, more lab time, or a lot of it was too basic, or whatever it was, I definitely appreciate that, and I think they would appreciate that as well. And then someone else said, why is no one mentioning that they are sorting credit card data in plain text, or credit card data in plain text? Yeah, I mean, this is staged in this environment. So I was just trying to have you find something. You'd be surprised though how often we see social security numbers, credit card numbers, stuff like that in plain text. It happens. And so this was super staged on a lot of these in a lab environment, just to give you some work. But you take some of these tools, skill sets, and you'll see like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that our financial file share or HR file share, that even if I don't have access to this, like let's say the permissions, I don't have permissions to open the salary document, but someone requested that did have permission, I can see that over the network. So permissions don't even matter at that point. So see slides, someone else posted the slides. Thank you very much. I appreciate you posting those again. I don't see any other questions there. If they are, I'll stay on for a few minutes, but I see Phil's got the webcam on if you want to say any closing things.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you again for doing this for us. We really appreciate it, and thanks to everybody that attended. I know it was a lot of great information, and we've got a lot to play with. So we really do appreciate you and what you're doing for the community, and just thank you for your time, and hope everybody has a great weekend.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. And I will, as I mentioned, I'll